2019 is truly an exciting year to be a manga fan. Just a few years ago, in 2017, we were celebrating the 100-year anniversary of anime, and now, 2 years later, we are celebrating the birth of one of anime's most defining and popular genres. We are, of course, talking about Yuri. 2019 marks the 100-year celebration, the centennial anniversary of Yuri. 100 years of girls' love set in all-girls schools with a beautiful black-haired senpai and short-haired blonde kohais. All the tropes we love to watch people in love and all those stories. And joining us today to talk about the history of Yuri, where it all originated, how it has developed over the years, and the story of the fandom, is Yuri manga tastemaker and historian, self-proclaimed Yuri Bodhisattva, Erica Friedman.
Hello. Every time somebody interests me, I start laughing. Sorry. Hello, I'm Erica Friedman. So nice to be here. Thank you very much for having me today.
It's awesome to have you here, Erica. You are the foremost historian and knowledge person on the subject of Yuri. You have written extensively on the topic on your blog, Okazu, for 16 years.
Absolutely. Actually, 17 years, and we are going to this week get our 4,000th post on Okazu.
That is incredible. And in addition to that, you are also the founder of Yuricon, and you even have your own Yuri manga publisher, ALC Publishing.
Correct. Yeah, we published 8 books between 2003 and 2010. We were the person who laid the foundation for a lot of the Yuri manga market here in America, and then I knew when I started that I wouldn't be in it for the long haul, because I knew companies with bigger pockets, deeper pockets, and more money and more connections would come in. But we definitely started to lay down the bricks for the road that became the Yuri manga market here in the United States and North America. So I'm very, very pleased to have been part of that bit of the history. Yuricon was founded originally as an online group in 2000, and we did some live events. We did gatherings in 3-day events and 1-day events, and we even did an event in Tokyo, and we did that until I got bored with that. And now we've shifted into doing research and running lectures and doing speaking worldwide, and particularly at universities and film groups and organizations. And we've got a lot of stuff coming up for 2019 because, as you say, it's the anniversary of the Yuri genre. Yuri manga didn't really exist till the 1970s, but the Yuri genre I date from 1919 and so 2019 is the 100th anniversary, and we have a lot planned for this year. So it is, as you say, a very, very exciting year. And I'm so pleased to be part of this exciting, growing, and very vital industry in both Japan and America.
Most definitely. There's an incredibly passionate community around Yuri, and you're at the center of it, being the organizer of all these incredible events.
Yeah, it's kind of I don't want to joke about it, but and to some extent, when you create a community, when you're the first person to really sit down and create a community, it's easy to be at the center of all the communities that's kind of, or spore off of it. So there's always been a lot of interest in Yuri, but it's changed a lot over the years. When I first started getting into Yuri, there was basically 2 sets of fans. There was fans who thought, well, yay, lesbian porn, and because of the nature of that particular fandom, they tended to assume that their interests and their requirements for what Yuri is, which was porn for them to pleasure to, was the only kind of Yuri and the only Yuri, and everybody else was wrong. And they were wrong, and they were wrong from the beginning. And I spent a couple of years showing them they were wrong, and showed them that women have always been involved in Yuri. And so Yuri, and this is the important part, Yuri is for men, for women, for straight people, for queer people, for anybody who loves Yuri. And just like any other genre, there should be no walls or boundaries for fans to enjoy a thing. And anybody, let me just say this plain out. Anybody who says, well, Yuri is for not you, or any organization or any genre, if somebody says, well, BL isn't for you or action isn't for you, well, you know what? They're talking out their ass. All of this stuff is entertainment for anyone who wants to be entertained by it. So why shouldn't this be the most inclusive thing in the world? And so when I was getting into manga back in the day, I'd been collecting comics since I was a child, since I was 7 years old. And so I was used to kind of the comic book guy attitude. And they were always wrong. I mean, it was always wrong. There was never a time when anybody who's gatekeeping entertainment was correct. And so I entered manga, and I started paying attention to things like Sailor Moon and girly stuff. And you got those people who decided to gatekeep. Well, Yuri is for you because it's not. It's about lesbian sex, but it's not for lesbians. And I'm like, how wrong that sounds? It doesn't even sound like you're speaking English.
Yeah.
Hey, this story is completely about you, but it's not for you. Isn't the most idiotic thing?
That is ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. So I said, well, hey, you know what? That's ridiculous. And because I wasn't 12, I was, in my late 30s and no longer had to put up with bullshit. And I wasn't really good at it when I was young either. I kind of said, hey, that's bullshit. How about we just have our fun over here and you can go do whatever you want over there? And so I started to create my own group. And I said, anyone who wants to talk about Yuri is welcome. You can be anything. You can be straight, you can be gay, you can be man, woman, you can be, genderqueer. When I created this 20 years ago, we weren't doing the non-binary genderqueer yet. Now it's in existence. You're trans, you're not. It doesn't matter, because what you get out of your entertainment is always personal. And so the most important thing is to say we're all fans of this genre, but it doesn't matter why we are all fans, what we're getting out of it as fans, or what the point of that is. So when I started writing Okazu, I was doing it because I was planning Yuricon, in a physical, real-life Yuricon event in 2003. So in 2002, I started to talk about what that takes. Because a lot of people who go to events don't realize how much it takes, how much work running an event takes. They tend to think that they show up and ta-da, it's all done. So I started writing about all the details.
It had to have taken months of planning in advance. Years. Exactly.
It takes a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of people organizing, a lot of volunteer time, and then people show up and they want to be entertained. And I said flat out, if you're coming to Yuricon, you're not going to be entertained. You are the entertainment. So come with your passion, with your amusing stories, with your interest. Join the panels, be part of the con. If you're just coming to have entertainment beamed into your head, you can go away. It's not who this group is, because, at that point, the large cons had already been well established. If you just want to go and get people talking at you and watching events and watching anime or whatever, there's plenty of that out there. You don't need to come to my event. So I always wanted my group to be very participatory, and I think over the years it's been full of really engaged, interesting, fun, generous, kind people as a result.
A community full of passionate and proactive fans that are actively making art or expressing their love for Yuri.
Yes.
And sharing them with other people.
Yes, exactly. And that you actually just nailed exactly what I was going to say. One of the things that I said right from the beginning, the thing that I wanted Yuricon to most represent was, here's a place where you can do that thing. Just do the thing that you said you're going to do. Write that story, draw that comic, make that video, and we will love it. It doesn't matter. We will love that you did that work, and we will enjoy it, and we will celebrate it. And that is exactly what we called Yuricon, a celebration of Yuri. So that's pretty much it.
And I'm curious, what was the first Yuricon like in terms of kind of the events or the community involvement? What were some of the things at Yuricon that, the community really got behind and has lasted to this day?
Well, we did a lot, and we did some things kind of ahead of the curve, and that's been a problem my whole life. I always do things ahead of the curve, and then somebody goes, well, that's a really great idea, and then runs with it, which is fine. I don't consider that a problem. We ran an academic track. And we were one of the very first conventions ever in anime or manga to run an academic track. So we had academics coming in and reading their papers and presenting their thoughts about things. We did things, we had normal fan panels, of course. We also had, and this was really sort of unique, we really focused on queer content.
Mm-hmm.
Now, back in the day, that was a lot harder. There weren't a lot of Yuri anime at all. The little bit that existed often was a bit of Okazu in the middle of a porn story or at the beginning of a porn story. The same thing was true with BL. I mean, so you had Boku no sexual harassment was what passed for BL.
No.
It wasn't like there was a lot of good BL, but we were showing some BL just to talk about the queer content. And that sort of thing was, I think, we were ahead of the curve on that as well. We were saying this is not, yes, that Yuri is not lesbian, like they're not equivalent. That's a Venn diagram with a lot of overlap, but they're not equivalent. But LGBTQ content exists in Yuri and BL and trans narrative manga, even when it was kind of sucky back in the day, because a lot of it at that time was really meant to be a comedy, which was really sort of dire. And we were talking about how you could still find queer resonance in stuff that wasn't necessarily meant to be in any way queer. And so that was something we did. And I think that's really been the thing that we've always built this around. And one of the goals I had originally back in the day was to build a bridge between Japanese otaku lesbians and American otaku lesbians. And I think we've very, very successfully done that over the years with a lot of connections, and I've gone over there and met folks, and they've come over here, and we've just really made that connection where there's these two groups of engaged queer folks within Yuri who want to reach out past those boundaries. And it's so much easier these days. I mean, back in the day, we had a couple mailing lists and email and stuff and websites. Now social media has changed everything. It's just Twitter's completely broken those barriers. You can just reach out and talk to just about anybody.
Yeah, the landscape has changed a lot because you can connect with anyone so easily, but also there is just so much more content now, and I think that's because it can be shared with other people more easily, and it can be made visible more easily.
Absolutely. Pixiv changed the landscape in a way that I don't think people have really appreciated. I mean, of course, there were always webcomics. Webcomics have been around since, 2000. And possibly earlier, although it would have been really hard to find them. I think 1998 was the earliest. DeviantArt was 2000. I think there was one. I just recently did a little bit of an article, and I have it here somewhere, but I'm not going to go look at it right now. But I was looking at basically about online systems. It was 98 to 2000 was when they all really sort of built up. And that was the first time people could put webcomics out in these sort of aggregated sites where you would go with keywords to find webcomics. And I remember sitting in my office in 2000 with bookmarks of webcomics, and going, oh, okay, I'm going to read this, and I'm going to read this, whatever. So, yeah, I mean, it's so much easier. Pixiv changed the landscape so massively, and Pixiv has become the online equivalent of the comic markets in Japan, where publishers now, they still do go trawl the creators at the comic markets to see talented people who can show you that they can complete a work. And that's why you go to a comic market as a publisher, because you're going, this person could put it together from beginning to end and not just dump you halfway and go, oh, sorry, life, But online too, you can see the immediate engagement. So you have something like Nagata Kabi-san's My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness, which she puts out as a webcomic on Pixiv and gets tens of thousands of responses and likes and tons of engagement, and the publishers can instantly see, wow, this thing's a game changer. I mean, it's not even just like there's a big long line today. There's this massive, obvious, publicly facing, visible response. And that's how you as a publisher can go, wow, so this is something we need to look at.
So many creators get their starts in the industry by creating their own stories, their own webcomics, or even their own doujins or their fan stories. Yeah. And those get noticed and they get great opportunities like Nagata Kabi. And it's really awesome to have so much more opportunities available, especially for queer creators to tell
Absolutely.
queer stories.
Absolutely. And what's happening too, and this is sort of interesting, is that Pixiv allowed something that even doujinshi has not been a great field for. Doujinshi markets are really fabulous, and you can find a lot of BL and Yuri and other stuff. I mean, literally other stuff, hamsters and trains, completely other, baseball manga and Takarazuka manga. But what you can't find, you don't see a lot of until fairly recently, was gay. There was a gay section. The last time I was at Komiket, which was a number of years ago, I walked up to a section where there were a lot of guys talking. It was adult men. And I walked up and I could see instantly that this was gay manga. And one of the guys came up to me and said in English, he goes, "This is gay manga." And I said, "I know." And I immediately bought a couple pieces to give to friends. You didn't see that until very, very recently. You had BL and you had Yuri, and there was some queer content in there, but you didn't have like a queer group of people. And now you're starting to get more and more of that. Pixiv opened that up as well, because now you can put your queer story out, your own real story, and people will read it and like it, or not read it or not like it, as they will, and you're not put in the position of standing in front of a group of people, handing them your life story, which is stressful for a lot of people. And it's sort of the best of all possible worlds. And so what we're seeing now more and more are things like comic essays, which I am extremely fond of, where people are telling their real life stories. In the same way that in independent comics here in America, particularly in North America, you're getting tons of artists doing their autobiographical comics. You have something like Jennifer Hayden's The Story of My Tits, which was about her breast cancer. Or you have Raina Telgemeier, who's North America's best-selling comic artist, with her things like Smile and Sisters, which are autobiographical stories. And all these artists are telling their real stories, but in Japan, that's a much harder, it was a harder premise to sell. I mean, the Americans will tell everybody anything. We walk up to total strangers and say, "Hi, I'm, whatever." And we're very external facing that way. And Pixiv has allowed artists who did not previously feel comfortable sharing that sort of thing to find themselves more comfortable in a space where they could be honest and open and public facing, but still keep some of themselves to themselves and choose to share what they want to share in a way that kept them in control of it. And that's been a massive thing. And then we've got, particularly East Press has picked up a lot of these comic essays and is publishing them in print form. And that was how Nagata Sensei got started, and Murashima Akiko's book about her ADHD, developing that and dealing with that as an adult. And they're really, really good stuff, but they're really personal. So that's changed the landscape completely.
It takes a lot of bravery to share your private life, and especially stories of you struggling with very personal things with the world. But because you can find a community online who can closely relate to and empathize with your experiences, like, it is also incredibly rewarding, and it's cathartic for the community as a whole to have these stories be written and be shared and like all be able to bond over these shared experiences. Especially among queer people who, before the internet, like, you couldn't, like, it would be much harder to find other people like you, but now thanks to the internet, you can find more stories about people like you who are going through the same hardships that you have been.
Well, in some extent, there was a very fully formed queer, and this is true in North America and Japan and Europe as well, a very, very fully formed gay community queer community that could be found in bars. And it's something that we've almost completely lost now. And I know there are folks, I came out in the mid-'80s, so it was just in the middle of the AIDS crisis. I was a suburban kid. I wasn't going into the city to go to bars. I kind of just was at the tail end of the bar scene, and I wouldn't have at the time because I didn't drink at all, and it would have really been boring and loud and irritating, and I wouldn't have liked the people who were there. So I kind of missed that whole thing, but I know people who are older than me that lament the loss of that, because there was an intimacy, and to some extent, it was the same intimacy, / privacy that we get with the internet, because you go to a bar and you could say you were anybody. Nobody cared. I can walk in and go, hi, I'm, Angelina Jolie, and people go, hi, Angelina, because it doesn't matter what I say I am. They're looking at me and talking with me and dancing with me or whatever. And there was a genuine community that grew up in Japan, the Shinjuku Ni-chome, where gay folks would go, was a center, like Greenwich Village in New York City, a real center of community and art and creativity. And like my friend Rica Takashima, who is an artist, she got her start in the lesbian bars of Shinjuku Ni-chome, and she joined a circle, and they put out a magazine, and so she started writing comics for that magazine, and then that magazine became another magazine, which was like a real big magazine with bar reviews and event reviews and her comics and some others and interviews and stuff. And so that stuff all really happened almost the exact same way. And one of the things I always like to caution people is humanity never changes. Only technology changes. So every group of people will always have had a way to find each other. There will have always been a center for community, for creativity. Yes, it would have been harder if you were the kid who lived out in, the boonies and you didn't have easy travel. Yes, you would have been alone. That would be true whether it was 1960 or the year 1600. That's never changed. But really, humans will always find a way to find people like themselves and live and create and tell their stories, and marginalized communities far more than any other group because we're more motivated. And that is true globally and throughout time.
Most definitely. And it was really great to read Rica to Kanji and see a snapshot of what kind of that bar culture was like in the 90s for queer folk. And because it's such an autobiographical kind of manga too, that there is also a lot of interesting details that I found very fascinating to read as well.
Right. I mean, I love that. The day I got sold on that one, well, I met Rica in 2002, and we met at an event that I was running for Yuricon at a lesbian bar, which is the only, one of 2 lesbian bars I've ever been in my life. She walked in and she said, basically I started talking to her and she said, oh, I'm a Yuri manga artist. I said, really? So she gave me a copy of her book, and I think it was page 2 where she's talking about which underwear should I wear, and I'm sold. Because this is clearly by a woman. This is totally any woman who reads this would go, yes, that would be the third thing you were thinking. Absolutely. Okay, do I look okay? Am I wearing the right underwear? So it was such a great line, and it totally sold. It was very genuine. And Rica's really like that.
It felt like it was truly about authentic, real experiences that, Rica had lived through. There's a chapter dedicated to menstrual cramps.
I love that chapter so much.
And some of the most emotional chapters to me were Miho's backstory, which it's interesting because, the character Rica is not really, to me, a lot of the time that Miho seems like she is the stand-in for Rica Takashima's personal experiences. And then the character Rica in the manga is kind of her own character to play off of Miho. But Miho-chan's memories, the emotionality of that story, that felt really true to life, that Rica was really putting in her own experiences and some of her childhood pain of kind of realizing, she was queer into that story.
Yeah, that bit about the Ronsil, not having the color that you could say. Interestingly, the last time I was in Japan, we were walking past a store that sells Ronsils, and they're colors now. It's not black for boys, red for girls, although definitely still more color choices that are going to be purple and pink and light green and stuff like that for girls, but it's definitely not this for the little kids, not the same. If you were a boy who wanted a red one, you could get a red one now. And I don't know. I mean, I think there'd still be issues with your family. You still have the inherent systemic sexism that exists in the world. And that's a different thing, which every generation has to kind of fight that battle over again, everywhere. But when I looked at the store, I'm looking at that, I'm like, look at the color choices. Wow. Mm-hmm. And there were things that were blinged out, they had little rhinestones around the edges. I'm thinking, how awesome is this? So the kids get more of a choice that's not just black for boys and red for girls. But I agree that dysphoria that Miho is having about the uniform, I think a lot of my friends could resonate to that. It took me decades to understand the dysphoria I had about girls' clothes. And I actually had to talk about it this week with my mom. And I said, it literally took me decades to realize how much trouble I had shopping simply because girls' clothes skewed me. And as an adult, I wear almost primarily men's clothes. And I feel like, yay, pockets. And things that, don't stop at my clothes, that don't stop at my waist and stuff like that. So sleeves that go longer than, 3/4. So I kind of really sympathized with that.
Yeah, freedom to express yourself, like, outside of any, like, societally mandated, if you are this gender, you have to wear this, you have to behave like this. I could really resonate with that as someone who, struggled with their sexuality at a young age too, and, like, also had dysphoria of, like, disillusion, not liking the idea of having to be restricted in, like, one box. So,
right.
I mean, that definitely hit me hard in a very relatable way too.
Exactly, and that's what I mean about this is for anyone. Because yes, it's not your story, but you could resonate with the concepts that it was expressing. And that's the most important thing. And what I see a lot, it's one of the ways I define sort of an immature fan versus a mature fan. An immature fan says, well, that's not my story, so I don't like it. Instead of going, well, that one doesn't resonate with me, so I don't like it. And there's differences. And also there's a way of saying, like, well, I resonate with this piece of it, but I don't really like this. And I'm really honest about that in my reviews. I'm very, very careful to say, look, I'm not the audience for this. Like, I'm watching Shiroi right now, the second season of Shiroi. And the kids basically most of the characters annoy the living daylights out of me. But they're children. They're meant to be actually children. I don't like children. I find them very irritating. So here I am being irritated by the childishness of these children. and I think that's a really good lesson for me, that this was not a cartoon designed for me. I am welcome to watch it and resonate to the pieces of it that I can resonate to, but it's for children who will recognize their own behavior and the behavior of their friends in it. And so that was very meaningful, because that's a part of life that I have no connection to.
Yeah, it's important to think about that the experiences that you've had aren't the only experiences. There are all sorts of other things people have gone through, and so even if you can't relate to those experiences, you should be able to empathize with them. And if you can't enjoy a story because it's meant for an audience and it's telling them stories for them, you should be able to step away from that and go, this isn't for me, but this is valid, and it's a good thing that it's there for an audience to connect with and get something of emotional substance out of it.
And if not, that's okay. And this is the rule. Here's the rules at Okazu. And this was the rules when we talked about stuff when I talk about stuff at Yuri panels and stuff. The rules go like this. Just because you like it doesn't mean it's good. Just because you don't like it doesn't mean it's bad. Just because it's bad doesn't mean you can't like it. And just because it's good doesn't mean you have to like it. And those are 4 really, really important rules that most people don't ever really kind of get. And most people in fandom, and by fandom, in this case, I mean people who are super engaged with something, not just watching and reading something, but like really super engaged about it. Most people, and this goes for everything, when they like something, it is equals good and must be defended at all costs. So, if you've ever sat with 2 people arguing about sports, you know exactly what I mean, right?
Right.
Or they get very passionate or screaming at each other about whatever. Now, I was a big sports fan my whole life, so my dad and I used to do toe-to-toe, nose-to-nose shouting matches at each other about things. And I get it. You identify with whatever team, and it was bad with us because he was a Yankees fan and I was a Mets fan for pretty much my whole life until I stopped watching baseball altogether when they all became assholes. But this sort of thing, you defend this. You get really into it. You find personal connections, right? And then you defend it because if they don't like your team or they're dissing your team, they're dissing you. And that's true for anything, whether it's make of car or your favorite whatever, food or whatever, or your favorite character in anime, or God forbid, your favorite relationship. These things must be defended, and I get that there's a fun quality of that kind of argument, but also there can be, and not always, but there is some portion always that goes into really weird toxic behavior, and so it's really important to remember that just because you love something with a fiery passion doesn't mean that the other person has to too.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember not too many years ago, I got a passionate email from somebody who I felt very bad for, who objected deeply to one of my reviews, not because they disagreed with it. They didn't want that anime showing up on Okazu at all. Because by doing so, I implied that there was anything potentially gay in it. And in fact, in my review, I actually say, no, there isn't. But they were so angry at the fact that I even had the nerve to imply that there might be something gay-ish in here. And they said, can't you please take this down? And I said, no, dear, I can't. I get to write about it. You can just not read it. And they're like, well, what would you do if somebody said something you didn't agree with about something you loved? And I laughed. I'm like, I don't mean to laugh at you, but I don't care.
Yeah.
I mean, my opinion is not changed by your dislike. If I'm very passionately in love with the characters of Haruka Michiru from Sailor Moon, I consider them the queens of Yuri, and I have an inordinate amount of goods in this house centered on them. I have just ridiculous amount. They're like sitting where I am. I can see, I don't know, about a dozen things of them sitting around me here in the office. And if somebody says to me, well, they're not gay, Uranus is Prince Uranus from another life, because they didn't understand the Ribbon no Kishi reference in that, that's fine. But then I just go, okay, and move on, because I'm not going to argue that you don't know what you're talking about, although A, you don't know what you're talking about, and B, you sound like an idiot, because it's just, I get it. It makes you sad to think that they're queer for some reason, but that's about you and not about me, and I don't have to feel like my passion for them or my resonance for them is affected by your complete closetedness. Because usually that's what it ends up being. Like, when people get really passionate about how Haruka Michiru are definitely not gay, I'm thinking, wow, you're so gay and you just don't know it. Like, that's so sad.
Oh my god. People get really tied up into the things they like are tied into their identity, like they define their identity
Isn't it
just
amazing?
by the things they like. And so they feel attacked when, someone disagrees with what they like and has a different opinion. And so they perceive that dislike of the thing they like as
a dislike of them. Right, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. And the thing is, too, and I get it, we all do it. We all do it. And it's hard to disassociate yourself from the things you love. But at the end of the day, this is cartoons and comic books.
Yeah.
So I can love them passionately, but still be okay if you don't,
Yeah.
I've written that about, like, well, gee, Erica, it's just a fucking cartoon. Get over it. Like, and that's, again, why I'm really honest about why I resonate with things and why I don't like things. Things that I like are very, very specific. I like manga with a lot of violence, but it has to be very specific. When it's exploitative violence, I dislike it deeply and absolutely, really, really skeeve it. But when it's like two adults who are beating the shit out of each other, I have no trouble with it at all, and I actually quite like that, because I actually do really like that kind of violence in entertainment. And I'm not going to apologize for it, but people go, oh, this is much too violent for me. And that's why I say something like Murcielago. I'm like, look, this is really violent. It's really violent. You're going to want to avoid it. If you don't like violence, do not read this. And it's also exploitative, which is creepy, because it rides the lines of what I'm comfortable with a lot of the time.
Yeah, there's like that arc where she was like in that school for girls.
That was the best arc.
And that was...
I love that arc. Virginal Rose arc. That was awesome.
Yeah. It was fun, but there's like moments in that manga where she's like really creeping on underage girls.
Yeah, yeah. And she's very honest about it, which doesn't make it any better.
No. But that manga is just so darn fun. Just
I have actually described it as really creative ways to kill people.
Yeah.
I mean, when I reviewed Volume 4, the Virginal Rose arc, I had said that the climax is when the bad guy is killed with a meat hook through the chest, and that's not the most violent thing that happens in the show. And I've said that because I want people to understand what the level of violence we're talking about. We're talking about, grindhouse stuff here, and it's fine if you know what that is, and if it's not your thing, you go, okay, and I had somebody once, kind of give me a really snotty, well, I can't believe you read that. I'm like, I'll get over it. Like it's, we're all going to have things that we like and dislike, and I like the cutesy poo stuff too, but my teeth are very sensitive, and too much sugar makes them hurt.
Yeah, it's fun to have something with like a little bit of a wild edge to it, like something just balls the walls crazy.
Well, I honestly do like things with a lot of violence. It's something I genuinely enjoy is fighting stories. I mean, I was a martial artist for years, and I like watching people beat the crap out of each other in real life. So, and I don't mean in an exploitative way, but like MMA. Like two large men who are equal, or women who are equally matched, who want to beat the living daylights out of each other, I find completely acceptable as a form of entertainment. You might not, and I get that you might not. So everybody's, got to just understand. And that's why I'm so open about my biases. Like, I don't like moe. I think it's creepy. I think people who like it are creepy. I think the reasons for the justifications for why it's cute or sexy is even creepier. And I think the more you justify it, the creepier you become. And I get what it is and why it is, and I still think you're a bunch of creeps for liking it, kind of thing. And I say that really blatantly because I want people to understand that if they like that, and I'm going, I did not like this, so therefore I don't like this manga. If they like that thing that I don't like, they can go, oh, I should try that manga. Mm-hmm. Like, if I'm honest about what I like and don't like, then hopefully people can make their decisions more fully.
Yeah, they can understand your perspective and, like, knowing, like, what your tastes are and, like, what you value. Like, they can make decisions on, like, what they will sort of resonate with in any pieces of media you recommend.
Exactly. So if I say, this is extremely moe, and I did not like it, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying I did not like it because I do not like what moe represents. However, if you're a big moe fan, you can go, well, okay, if it's extremely moe, maybe I will like this thing. It's there's value. I mean, I remember reading many years ago when I was a kid, the local paper at the time had a movie reviewer that I disagreed 1000% with. So I would read their reviews to find out when they hated something, because they hated pop culture stuff. They only liked really intense drama, and I couldn't stand that. So, and when they would just kill a movie, they'd say, this is the worst thing ever, I'd go out and see that one. Because they hated things that I enjoyed. So great, now I know if you hate it, I probably might enjoy it, or at least I'd be more likely to enjoy it than something you like. And there's value to that. That's why you read reviews, is to get perspective.
Yeah, and it's great to read a lot of different perspectives to understand more fully the ways people can interpret a work and the ways of meaning that they can derive from it. Because that also helps you, expand your own horizons in critically engaging with media and understanding it.
I think that is a really important point. I'm so glad you said that. That is exactly right. Because when people engage with the media, what they frequently forget to do is engage with the ways to understand the media. I'm a comparative literature major from college way back in the day. That is one of the things I frequently do, is talk about completely other forms of works, other media, other genres, but also other styles, dance and fine art and photography, just whatever. But I'm talking about things well outside the media of sequential art, because I want people to understand literature is, of course, was my specialty, so I write a lot about literature. I want people to pick up books without pictures, and I'm not saying that there's no value in it. I think it's important. I think reading a comic is reading. I don't think there's a line there in the sand. All reading is reading, but there's some rewards you get from working at a book without pictures, and there's different rewards that you get when you have pictures, and there's different things again when it's mostly pictures, or it's film or video or a visual novel. Every way you engage with material, your brain develops differently. And I am a huge believer in, Do you want to understand manga better? Go to a museum. Take some time to learn about fine art. Take some time to learn about different styles of art. Take time to learn about classical Japanese literature and different historical periods. Learn about the things that kids in Japanese schools read. Go to, learn about Japanese style of art so that when you're looking at something, you're not making this facile, anime to anime connection. And you look at something, you go, oh, hey, I recognize that reference as referencing, Hiroshige. For instance, you understand that this thing about that pun about the Tokaido Road was a specific joke about something, and you start to understand that there's all the references. And that's actually how I got into this, because I was watching the Utena movie. I was reading the Utena movie manga, and the movie manga has a scene that the final scene of the movie manga is a scene that heavily references a book called Yana Ura no Ni Shoujo by Yoshino Nabuko, which was published in 1920. It was serialized in 1919 and published in 1920. And at the end of that book, one of the characters turns to the other and says, let's go to the outside world. And it was a very socio-political statement at the time for one young woman to turn to another and say, let's leave this hothouse school where we are and leave the tower where we are, the Yana Ura. Let's leave this and go outside and make a life together as women, not being married off by our families and not trying to fit into a man's society, but make our own lives. And here I am reading the movie manga, and Ashi turns to Utena on the last page and says, let's go to the outside world. And I went, bam! I know that reference. And all of a sudden I realized, wow, I bet I've been missing references all over the place. Like, I got a few of the references in Utena up to that point, but then I had to start really doing some work, and I started researching, and I found that there were a bazillion references I had missed that were things that the Japanese audience would totally have gotten. And right on top of that, a few years later, there was the series Strawberry Panic, which a lot of people here in America interpreted as a really lovely romance, and I saw instantly was a giant fanfic. They took references from everywhere, and Western references and Eastern references, and they had references to things that had happened in manga like Himitsu no Kaidan, which is this old sort of proto-Yuri manga that was really cool back in the day by an artist who's still writing right now.
Awesome.
And they had the Midnight Tea Party comes from that. And then they also did like Wuthering Heights and Carmen, and at the end of the thing, I kept saying for weeks, I kept saying, I know exactly what I want them to be referencing at the end of Strawberry Panic. I want it to be The Graduate. And damned if they didn't do it. That was the final scene. I was like, boom! They actually stole directly from The Graduate. And I thought, this is a giant fanfic. This whole thing is this massive stealing of concepts from everywhere. But the American viewers didn't get any of them because they hadn't read those books and hadn't watched those movies and didn't. Even the American stuff, like the Wuthering Heights scene is about as unsettled. The Carmen scene is literally the play that they do in the middle of the thing is Carmen. It's not like it's subtle. This is not like it's hidden, right? They're actually literally doing the play Carmen. Really well thought out. In the middle of the thing, they go, hi, we're taking Carmen and we're actually going to do Carmen with Carmen. Like, this is what they were doing here. And the audience just wasn't getting it. They just weren't grokking what was going on here. And then when the novels came out, people were like, oh, it's so pretty. And I'm like, oh my God, the language is ridiculous and overblown. And it's on purposely, it was ridiculous and overblown. And they did that with the references too. So there's a Roman mouth of truth in the middle of the school. There's no reason for there to be one, but there is. And so we built a scene around it. And you need to know what the things are to understand what the meaning of. And I thought, well, the Yuri fandom would be so much better served by reading some books. So at that time, I started doing a stolen meme count on our Yuricon mailing list at the time, which is now long gone. But basically, every week we'd say, okay, here's the episode, and here's all the things they took from and where they took them from, so that you can understand what references you missed because you didn't read that book. You read the Cliff Notes. I'm sorry, Spark Notes or whatever. There were Cliff Notes when I was in school. And, and so all the things that you didn't ever even heard of. So we actually just kept this running list of all the things that they referenced. on Strawberry Panic so people can understand that there's all this stuff that they're missing.
Yeah, there is a lot of context surrounding pretty much any piece of media you consume because, like, I like how you describe Strawberry Panic as like a fanfic because I feel like pretty much any piece of media is kind of like a fanfic on the part of the writer. Like, they're taking, like, ideas that they got inspired and they really are fond of from elsewhere and they incorporate that into their own work and like they mix and match the different elements to like make it something truly their own. Yeah. But like everything is really inspired by a lineage of things that have come before and that's not just from one specific medium but from all around them.
Of course.
In other forms of art and especially from real life experiences too.
Yes, absolutely. And that's really that's the meaning behind the 7 plots concept, that there's only 7 plots, That's true, there's only 7 plots, but it's how you make them yours. And that's why a lot of writers say start with what you know. I don't think that that's good advice because everyone does start with what they know, and frequently that's quite banal. So I've always said, no, don't start with what you know, learn something new. Start from something that you need to work up to. And that's my advice to people, but start from what you know is fine, which means that you get stories that are, at schools because the person writing it knows a school, or, it's not like, it's not like a lot of manga is really functionally original.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I tell you I'm writing a manga and it takes place as an office, you'd go, well, duh, Erica, you work in an office. Actually, I don't work in an office, but I'm in the working world, so that makes sense that I would want the working world represented in my story. I mean, if I said to you, I'm making a martial arts loving lesbian librarian series, you'd be like, right, duh. Like that's not exactly like a stretch. But that would be, of course, what most people would do because it's who they are and what they know. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's a great place to start. But as you're writing, you should be stretching yourself and learning a little bit more. And more importantly, learning the characters more. I'm a big fan of letting my characters lead the story.
Mm-hmm. I think a good approach to writing is to write about something you want to learn about or you don't know as well, but incorporate your real life experiences, like stuff that you do know, like to give it a sense of emotional authenticity.
Yes, exactly.
As a writer, you should always try to be learning about new things while you're writing.
And people, learning about people, because that's the worst writing, when you get somebody who's like writing about something that they're not, and they're going, okay, well, I am going to write this person. You get people, I remember this very vividly, getting things back in the day, emails, but guys saying, I write really good lesbians. I'm like, no, you don't, and I can tell you why. Because you write lesbians. That's not how you write. I don't write like, all right, I'm writing a bunch of lesbians and there's a man in the story and I'm going to write this man really well. I know how to write men. You don't write like that. That's weird.
Yeah.
You write people, you write your character. What's the character about and what does the story need? You don't write a type. If you're writing a type, I am going to include a Puerto Rican character in this story and I will make sure everybody knows she's Puerto Rican. That would be weird and also inauthentic in every possible way. I don't have that background. I don't know that background. I'd be literally putting in random words and food items. It's like, that's not okay. That's exactly when wow, this is a white person or a really shitty story, and lots of people do it that way. Like, look at all this stuff that I know about this thing.
You can always tell when someone is writing their idea of what a person is like, rather than really being interested in exploring the interiority of that person, what their inner life is like, what their experiences have been, and how they inform their actions and how they behave with other people.
Yes, exactly. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And you brought up Utena earlier, and Kunihiko Ikuhara's work on anime, on Sailor Moon and Uta, is like very influential, I think, on Yuri culture, like going out into the world. And he's a queer man, but he's not a lesbian by any means. But his characters, they feel like fully fleshed out, three-dimensional human beings.
Yeah.
And so they feel like authentic people.
They do. But you can, if you watch a lot of his series in a row, you can really start, like if you watch Utena and you watch Mowaru Penguin Drum and you watch Yuri Kumarashi, just those three, once you've watched those three, you will start to realize there are pieces of him in there.
Yeah.
Not just his visual language, but there's some stuff he's got going on with parental abuse, for instance. He has got some serious issues with parental abuse. Now, I don't know if he just feels that that's a really strong point that he can hammer on, or he personally has issues with it, but it's a repeated theme in his stories. And it's one of the themes that when you read, when you encounter his work repeatedly, you start to go, whoa, there's something here. And I don't know if he knows somebody or he personally, and I wouldn't begin to guess, but the bottom line is that that's a piece of himself or some story that he needs to work through that shows up periodically in almost everything he's ever done. And I find that fascinating because when you've done a lot of work, when you have several major series, you can't hide yourself anymore. And things that you need to work through show up. And it's so fascinating because there was an artist, an author that I really liked in American sci-fi. Her name was Melissa Scott. And she was really hot for a while, and I was reading all her work, and I thought, she's hiding behind her own work. There's something she needs to deal with that she's not touching here. And she's using all this other stuff to shield herself. And it always felt inauthentic. And I loved her stories. I loved the designs of them, but they always, at the end, felt hollow. And I was always sad about that because I felt like if she just let it go, she would have blown me away, you know? But obviously this is the way she wrote. I wasn't going to be able to change that, you know? But I always remember that. Like, just sometimes you have to just let the authentic you show up in your writing, too. And I'm saying writing, but of course that is true for drawing and for you know, animation
any piece
and
of
film and anything.
artistic expression.
Any expression, yes, exactly.
Like emotional sincerity, like truly putting in what you're passionate about, what you believe, like things that you are, that are tied to like you exploring something about yourself. Yeah. Like I think that's a lot of why Ikuhara has such a passionate fan base and such a fan base interested in learning more about his work and like understanding everything there is to know about his work, is because it is dense with ideas that he has and things that he wants to express and recurring motifs throughout his works. Like the boxes in Sarazanmai are like, you know, you can go back to, even Utena shows up, but then it immediately reminds you of Penguin Drum, and that's a big thing of Penguin Drum. I
think Penguin Drum might end up being, I mean, as much as I love Utena, and there's a lot of things to love in it, I think more Penguin Drum might very well be his finest piece of work.
It is a beautiful show.
There's a lot of stuff that he does in that set him on his path for Sarazanmai and some of the other things he's done, Yuri Kumarashi stuff, some of the visuals there. And you really, I mean, he has his own very distinct style. And I think you're right about boxes and walls. I mean, he uses these visual things repeatedly. Whether or not there's real meaning back there, I don't know, but they've become his.
Right.
You know, coffins. Boy, does he love his coffins.
Yeah, coffins. And man, even like otters and penguins, like there's bears. There's symbolism like going back in all his works that you can trace through and then see him like, now I'm going to emphasize this idea, this symbol of the otter.
Yes, we had a last year for my Patreons, I had an online party and we did a trivia contest, and one of the questions was in Utena, name 5 animals that appear. And we counted. We actually really thought about it. We counted like 13 animals that we could name ultimately between my wife and I. And the question was name 5. And we got about 9. The group got about 9. It was really amazing how often he uses animals to stand in for various concepts. But nobody remembered the kangaroo in Utena. I was very sad.
What? How do you forget the kangaroo?
Yeah, I know, right? The kangaroo was great.
Everyone remembered the elephants, right?
Yeah, oh yeah. That one is yeah. And the cow.
And the cow. How can you forget the cow?
The cow is like the
Nami turning into the cow is one of the greatest episodes.
And the thing is, whether or not that has any meaning, and this is important, like whether or not the Nami turning into a cow had meaning, or whether it was left there as a visual thing for us to assign meaning to, doesn't matter. ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, what's great about Ikuhara is that there is like this very complex emotional stuff that he's expressing, but there's also things in there he throws in just for fun because he likes it.
Or he thinks it looks cool, right? Yeah.
Yeah, the butt stuff in Saran Sanmai, I think that's just there for fun. He's just
And
playing
it
around.
may have meaning, and it may have one meaning to him, and he put it there because it will look cool and let other people make up their own meanings. And that's actually some of the things I really like best about his work, is that the symbolism is established within the context of the story, like the apple and Memorial Penguin Drum.
Yeah.
It's not, sure, apples are rife with symbolism throughout art. It's not like we need to drag ourselves very far to find, what do apples mean? What does it mean within the context of the story?
Yeah.
And then we can assign a lot of stuff around that. And that's, I think, really, honestly, that's what I think he's doing. He's saying, okay, yes, we're picking a thing that has a lot of symbolism of itself, then we create this other symbolism, we leave it open-ended, and then we let it go. Actually, to me, the most breathtaking use of that, again, in Memorial Penguin Drum, is the statue, the city statue outside the building when we're getting the scene of the girl's father carving her. That statue becomes, it's David, so it's obviously very meaningful, but it also becomes horrific. And it starts to become the creepiest thing you've ever seen. And anytime you see it, you immediately creep now. And I've never liked the statue since. So it's so fascinating to see how he takes things that have symbolism, creates symbolism around it, and then leaves you to deal with that.
Yeah, like finding new meaning in like commonly used objects that have been used as symbols in other works or other stories. Like he extrapolates like how he feels about those objects and uses it in a different way in his stories.
Right.
And that's what's really fun about his work, is that, you might see like these symbols, like an apple, that's so common in other works, but like the way he uses it is so much different.
Exactly. Or is it, and are we just reading into it? Because that's the other question, right? Like, did we make that up? I was reading something last night, and I felt it was very gory-esque. I was reading Emily Carroll's When I Arrived at the Castle, which is a brand new book out from Koyama Press, and I highly, highly recommend it. And I'm going to be interviewing her at Toronto Comics Arts Festival coming up in a couple weeks. And when you look at her work, particularly on her website, I start feeling there's a lot of references to like Edward, to Gorey. And Edward Gorey, and I'm thinking, I wrote her as a question for our potential interview. I said, am I getting the Gorey thing, or do you wish he'd come back to life so you could kill him? like, you know what I'm saying? Like, was he an inspiration, or are you annoyed that he's an inspiration, or is he not an inspiration, but everyone says that, So I think we often, as readers, and again, this happens because I'm a comparative literature person, I'm always naturally keyed in to doing comparative things. This thing reminds me of this thing, which is how I got into Yuri in the first place, because this thing reminded me of this thing, and then I realized there was a reference, and then I realized that thing reminded me of this other thing, and this other thing going back to 1919, and so when I picked a year for the birth of the Yuri genre, I picked 1919, which is the serialization of Yanara ni Shoujo, but it's fair. It's to some extent arbitrary, but on the other hand, that particular novel set so many tropes that became constants, not just of Yuri, but of girls' literature. And
the class S literary movement starting in the 1920s.
Right, and Yoshino Buko was part of that, and she also wrote Hana Monogatari, which was like the generation-defining work for young women in the 1920s. So her work set tropes that to this day we would recognize in girls' literature, and then from that manga, and then from that anime to this very day. And so I felt that I think of her as the grandmother of Yuri. I don't think she'd be uncomfortable with that. I hope. She hasn't struck me down yet. But I feel like her stuff was so integral to the tropes that developed through the S aesthetic, and then into Yuri manga, into the mid-50s, some of the proto-Yuri manga, and then into the 70s when you got actual people writing BL and Yuri at the very beginning, before those words even existed for these things, before, nobody was, when Heart of Thomas was being created by Moto Hagio, she was not thinking I'm writing a boy's love because that word in yaoi didn't exist yet, but that feeling was what she was sort of developing. And the same thing with Yamagishi Ryoko's
Shiroi Heya no
Shiroi
Futari.
and Futari, yes. Exactly, to our white room, and it's got so many things that we would recognize instantly.
Yeah.
So it's just sort of set so many tropes. So I feel like once I started reading stuff and realized there was an artistic and literary continuum back to the early 20th century, I was like, wow, this is not just standalone. And it's important to always remember that nothing happens in a vacuum, right? All of humanity continues. So Yuri began because two women loved each other and two guys liked the idea of two women having sex. I mean, those are separate things. They're unrelated, but these two things happen all the time simultaneously throughout history. So this sort of thing just happens, and then people write stories about those things, and sometimes they overlap and sometimes they're really totally different. But when we tie it all together, we can look at it and say all of this can be one genre. We can give it all a word.
Right. I mean, there's always a context for why things happen when they do. That's interesting to look back to, but also like kind of the lineage of events that lead up to the modern day. So I think that just based on the description, what you say about Yanura no Nishoujo, like I think that does seem like a valuable place to start when you're tracing back like what we know as Yuri today, like what tropes, what types of stories being told, where did that all originate, or like really become kind of codified and then expanded on from there.
Exactly. It's sort of, she established things that became those tropes, like the exotic girls' school, Catholic school in some foreign, unreal place and time where there's, yes, as you said earlier, a Nadeshiko beauty and a cute, Genki younger woman. And these things sort of just became so recognizable that they just go on and on and on, and it becomes parodies of themselves, which is actually really funny. And then they get reversed because look, we're doing the opposite now, and and it's totally normal. And what we're seeing right now is, I was joking, I did a review yesterday of a drama CD. It's an original doujinshi drama CD that I picked up at Komitia this past February, and it's starts with a young woman, a high school girl, walking around Shinjuku Kabukicho at midnight, and she sees an older woman, apparently drunk, and crying, and she helps the woman. The two of them end up falling in love. And I jokingly say in the epilogue that so drunk working women are now the cool, athletic Onesama of Yuri 2020. Like that's the thing. So they're getting, because what's happened is all the people who are writing Yuri have gotten older, right? And it's
right.
High school stuff is great. There's nothing wrong with young love, but damn it, when I'm 54 years old, I'm no longer interested in watching 16-year-olds. It's not it's not something I'm resonating to. I want to have stories about adults. And of course, I'm waiting for now all the mangaka who are younger than me are drawing that now, and eventually they're going to get to my age, and we're going to start seeing senior Yuri. And you're starting to get like occasional bits of it, but we haven't gotten a lot of that because of course they're not there yet, so that's not their story. But the first time they're in, one of them and their girlfriends are in the hospital, you're going to start seeing senior Yuri with like these really dramatic medical things. Like it's going to happen. I'm going to tell you right now, it's going to happen. But Yuri is still so young that we still get a lot of girl stuff. Plus, the idea of school being sort of a fantasy space in and of itself, where nothing, it's sort of like what happens in high school stays in high school. So that you get
that's a trope in Yuri manga. It's like, oh, we are going to be lesbians until graduation.
Yep, bi until graduation or lesbian until graduation. That lug bug thing is a real thing in real life. And so there was more way back in the day, like 10 years ago. Yeah, there was still the marriage or death thing where you would leave school and you couldn't be together anymore. One of you would have to go get married, go home, get married, or one of you would die and leave the other one. And that was a massive trope all the way into the 2000s. We're seeing it less and less and less. And as marriage equality gains traction globally and in Japan, as people insist upon their relationships being seen as family and not just this thing we do until we build a real family that you're going to see more and more of this. And so because manga is always and always has been a place where ideas you can't express at the dinner table, things you don't say to your friends and family face to face, that's what manga's for. And that was actually something I was talking about with Rica Takashima just the other week. It's in itself, manga is a fantasy space. It's a space where we work out stuff that we want to say or think or do or experience or understand that we would not be able to sit down and talk to our family about or our spouses or whatever. And that's why that thing where, I fell in love in high school becomes such a rich area because it's non-threatening. It makes people feel safe. And for many years, I'm going to say something massively sexist, and I apologize, but it's just really the truth. Men always assume everything they do is the standard, and since they run all the companies, they say what we are is a standard. So when men who were fans of manga are running the companies that publish manga, it becomes recursive, right? The stories they want to read are the stories that you read, which are the stories that are published, which are the stories, which are read, and it becomes this recursive thing. And so what happens is, for many decades, what you had was men publishing stories that did not threaten men. So you had women writing stories of these high school loves and men writing stories of these high school loves, and the assumption was always that the girls would graduate and then go get married. And that was no longer true for decades before these stories kept continuing, but it was unthreatening to the otaku male mind because they all knew that, of course, eventually they'd get a wife. That's obvious. They will be given a wife. And it's a hard sense of reality when you realize that you've done nothing to make yourself an interesting person and nobody wants to marry you, and you start getting angry and blaming other people, which is what we're seeing with the asterisk gators, where they're really, really angry that the world has not found them to be as interesting as they find themselves.
Yeah, the world doesn't revolve around them and
what
their
stories
want.
Anymore, right? Exactly. And not only that, but we find it ridiculous. It's not
they
just...
They feel threatened that other people are coming into the space. They can't fathom that other people enjoy playing games or reading comics.
And I gotta say, I've been doing this a long time, and it's like this with every generation. Every generation of young men have the world explained to them over and over, each one individually, because they don't read the answers to the other questions, and they don't care that you've done this 1,000 times, and every single person comes on to Quora and says, but why gay? Every person wants their personal time with every gay person or every feminist. It's always the same thing. It's very tiresome. But the bottom line is that the idea that these two girls in love in middle school is fine because we know that they'll grow up and get married and have children like good women are supposed to, is starting to fade out in Yuri. It's still there, but it's fading. And a lot of Yuri still isn't gay. There's very little lesbian identity. It's one of my ongoing definitions on Okazu, is that Yuri is lesbian content without lesbian identity. That's the difference, because if it has lesbian identity, then it's an LGBTQ story. It's a queer story.
Right.
So, but we're seeing little dribbles of that here and there, and so it's always changing. Everything's changing, but we're definitely seeing at least more adults now.
Yeah.
Because the artists are older and want to see more adults in their work, and that's what's going to happen.
And now that people are becoming more comfortable, proudly declaring themselves, yes, I'm an LGBT person, I want to be visible in my art and the media I consume. Now that more artists who are feeling comfortable with declaring themselves as LGBTQ or writing stories for that audience, like now we're having more open characters in manga, which I'm very happy to see. And these characters can have their stories being told in manga without having the tragic ending, like the, kill off my gaze trope. Like, in Shiroi, Heya.
I love that.
Like, Simone she never says the words, I am a lesbian. But she doesn't deny that she is.
But she probably wouldn't have known the words.
There's a moment in the manga where Resin is distraught she hears the rumors of classmates saying that
Yeah.
she and Simone are lesbians,
Right.
or lesbos in the Scanlation is a slang. But then, she confronts Simone about it and says, oh, this is ridiculous. Like, we're just friends, right? And then Simone is like smoking a cigarette, unconscious. I don't like to lie. She doesn't deny. So, like,
Right.
there, it's like a confirmation. No, Simone sees herself as a lesbian.
Yes.
But of course, because she is the out lesbian character, she has to die
She's also
tragically
an
at the
outsider.
end.
She's very much the outsider at that school. And I want to point out that the two of them are living in an attic room, the Yana Ura. So I just want to say that because I'm telling you, there's these. I love the end of that because what a lot of manga readers do not realize because they don't read lesbian pulp novels from the 1950s and 60s here in America. Lesbians dying in a knife fight is such a really, really common trope in American lesbian pulp. And when Simone goes to the bar, gets drunk, gets herself killed in a knife fight, I actually was howling with laughter. I'm a terrible person, but I was like, thank you, that is perfect. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful moment of a merging of two massive pulp concepts, I really think Shiroi no
Heya no Futari.
I couldn't get it out. Jeez, Shiroi Heya no Futari. Man, I think it is a fantastic pulp manga.
Yeah.
And it came out at the same time as Maya no Surutsu, and that's also another fantastic pulp manga. Some of the early Yuri manga do read like pulp novels from the 1950s because they're so overblown and so overwrought, and I love that. I mean, I'm a collector of lesbian pulp. I think it's fantastic. And in one of my Yuri Monogataris, I actually wrote a story that somebody else illustrated where it was basically all the pulp. So it starts with a woman in jail, and she talks about how she was a young woman. She came to Hollywood and was picked up by a starlet and became her kept woman. And eventually, they got into a fight and she killed her lover in a knife fight and ends up in jail. I thought it was the funniest thing I've read. People hated it. I thought it was hilarious because, of course, it's all the pulp tropes all in one story, right? But again, this is not an overlap that's common at all. So people didn't recognize it. And it doesn't matter. I mean, people can hate it. It didn't matter. I did it for me, and I don't really care about other people's opinion. I thought it was hilarious having a story that was basically a Yuri manga that was all the lesbian pulp tropes.
I feel like there's a little bit of playing with tropes in Shiroi Heya. Like, it comes across to me like that Yamashiki Ryoko, because she was a reader of this literary tradition of, Class S novels, but also probably the American lesbian novels that were coming out in the 50s, like, she was incorporating both of those and kind of doing a wink and a nod to some of these tropes.
Yeah, I don't know that she actually would have read the American stuff. She was a fine artist, so it's hard to know what her entertainment was. I'm not sure she actually read any of that stuff, but she definitely had that sense of overblown, overwroughtness that makes fine pulp.
And also some of the melodramatic moments in the manga that can be skewed for comedy. Like some of Rezin's reactions to things that Simone does.
Oh, yeah,
like
absolutely.
One of my favorite moments in the manga is like Simone has snuck out for the night. And like Madame Meru is like knocking on the door to check like that boat. Rezin and Simone are like in their beds, and like Simone just sneaks back through the window and she crawls in her bed, and then Meru checks that they're both there, and then she leaves, and then immediately afterwards, like Simone jumps out of bed and jumps out the window. And like Rezin's reaction is like, "Oh, she's so insincere." It's like,
it's so random, right? You're like, wait, what? Like that's your reaction? I know, but it's very funny because it is very overblown. But if you look, have you read Heart of Thomas?
Unfortunately not. Okay. I need to read more.
I recommend it. It is out in English. Rachel Thorne did the translation, and I recommend it because you can see that it also is very overblown. That whole period of time was all of the manga was very, very, hand to the forehead. I'm playing. It's my turn to be Percy Bysshe Shelley today, kind of thing. And it's all very, very.
Yeah.
But it is I love that manga, really is. And I consider that to be the first really Yuri manga.
I like that melodramatic because it's like sincerely silly.
Yes. But it's presented as completely serious. Like, that's why it's so funny. It's not meant to be funny.
Like, I feel like that moment, there's just an element of, like, a wink and a nod of comedy there, but maybe that's just me
The way you
seeing
want to,
that.
yeah, yeah. It's hard to tell. I think the whole thing is presented very, very straight.
Right. The climax where Simone is killed, like, that is, like, a serious
I
moment,
love
and, like,
that
that is
moment.
it's a breathtaking panel, like,
Yeah,
the panel that's, like, showing all the emotions of her
I
falling down
know,
after the
right?
stab.
And the desperation in her face. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not a really detailed manga, but the desperation in her face as she basically throws herself on the knife.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Basically, I mean, she tells the guy, stab me right here in the heart if you're gonna do this.
Yeah. And she just looks she's so intense. I mean, I love how intense she is through the whole thing. She's
Mm-hmm.
hyper intense. That actually leads me to that manga, among a number of other manga and manga magazines from my collection, are going to be on display at the Toronto Public Library, the main
Awesome.
reference library. Outside page and panel, there's going to be a display for the month of May celebrating 100 years of Yuri.
Mm-hmm.
And Shiroi and Futari is going to be among them. So is Yana Urana and Shoujo. I've got one of the original issues of Margaret magazine that has Rose of Versailles. I've got some new manga, some of the stuff that's been translated into English. And so basically you get to see 100 years of Yuri laid out in front of you in visual form.
Now that's incredible. I definitely would love to attend that exhibition, like just see like the history of the manga as like how it was presented originally through these magazines,
Yes.
like this collection.
I gotta tell you, I was in Japan in February for Comitia and went to Mandarake, as we all do, to make our my whole pilgrimage to Mandarake to spend money. And I went, they have a old manga store, and I have, in all the years I've been going, never found a single issue of anything. And they had 3 issues of Margaret with original stories that were of interest to me, Ace Norai and Rose of Versailles. And I picked them up. I'm like, yes, please. I would love to have these. And so now I have some of these in my collection, and I've got one is mine and 2 are gifts. But the answer is, I'm holding this thing, and it's like, for me, even this is like original, cool history. I mean,
Mhm.
some of the stuff I have in my collection here, I think this is the first doujinshi that Morinaga Milk did, or this is the first doujinshi that was, whatever, this person or whatever. I have these things and I think, wow, like
Wow.
this is so and so's origin. This is the first thing that they ever did that was, publicly available, and that stuff is really meaningful to me. I love that. But the 100
Hmm.
Years of Yuri lecture is going to be going on tour this year, so we're going to be at TCAF, at Toronto Comic Arts Festival, May 11th and 12th. We're going to be at Queers and Comics the next weekend, 17th, 18th, in New York City. We're going to be at Anime Next in Atlantic City, New Jersey in June. I'm going to be up at Yuricon in Montreal in August. And then in September, we're doing a 100 Years of Yuri tour of Japan with Packset Travel. And you can go to packsettravel.com, P-A-C-set, S-E-T, travel, it's all one word, packsettravel.com, and go for the 100 Years of Yuri tour. It's going to be a week-long Yuri extravaganza. We're going to be going to locations that appear in Yuri anime. We're going to be going to Yoshino Buko's house. We're going to be doing Yuri shopping like crazy people, and we're going to do a onsen overnight, and we're going to be talking Yuri for a solid week. And it's an amazing once in a lifetime tour. So I really hope people will join us because it's going to be exceptional.
Yeah, that sounds like an awesome experience. And it's like a real Yuri pilgrimage.
It is. It's exactly it.
Hmm.
That's exactly when I first went to Yoshinobuka's house. That's exactly what I called it. It was my pilgrimage to be able to give her, to give her my regards. I mean, it was such an extraordinary thing to think here was where she lived with her wife, or what would have been her wife now. Her secretary
Hmm.
Chimama for her whole life. They lived together until she died. So
Yeah, and that's awesome. But, going back to your collection and some of those early Yuri works, so Shiroi Heya, we would consider like the first Yuri manga, really, like 50 years after the foundation of the genre of Yuri. In 1971, like, we would consider that the first Yuri manga. But then afterwards, like, for the next 2 decades before what I guess we would consider the modern Yuri as it started up in the 90s. Like, what were some of the key works from that period, from 70s and 80s? Yeah,
Sailor
in the
Moon.
90s, but like in the 70s and 80s, like leading up to Sailor Moon.
Okay, so after Shiroi no Futari, I don't know why I'm having trouble like totally stumbling on that every time. People are like, does she have any idea what she's talking about? So that thing that I keep not being able to say for some reason. After that, there was kind of a lot of lull because the 70s was a pretty heavy period of time where people were being very experimental and there was just a lot of stuff going on. Really, you didn't see a lot of Yuri in mainstream anything. You did see some doujinshi, but mostly that was at the very, very late 80s. So what happened was, and this is where it gets kind of historically weird. So in the 1970s mid-70s is when Komiket was founded. 75, I think, was the first year. And what happened was, like everything else, a lot of the stuff that was being printed at the time was lesbian porn for guys who were drawing it for themselves, right? And they took the word Yuri from the Yuri Zoku no Heya, which was the lesbian letter page of a gay magazine called Barozoku. And so they were having their lesbian characters called Yuri or Yuriko or Yurika. And so you had a lot of lesbian porn in these early doujinshi, and not surprisingly, because of that, women were kind of disassociating it. But what happened was over here in lesbian communities and early feminist communities of the 1970s, you had a completely different, it actually was almost exactly the same in America. You had gay comics being published. It was a lot of men drawing gay comics for gay men. And then you had the lesbians doing their own stuff in newsletters, where a lot of it's informative and, here's our get-togethers, here's our monthly meeting, it's very organizational, right? So you had these newsletters going out, and that's true in Japan and America. So oddly parallel, where you had lesbians making like these newsletters where they'd have a piece of fiction or a poem and informative information, and you could call this hotline, here's our meeting, if you're want to meet other women, come here, and then also have some comics. And in Japan, you had these comics, and so in the 70s and 80s, that was where you found anything that we would think of as Yuri, was in these now gone ephemera of organizational stuff. In the 80s, things started getting printed and sometimes sold at events. I have some pieces from I think 1988 is the oldest thing I have. And then in the 90s, you kind of had a bit more of a boom because people who'd grown up reading some of the early BL and Yuri stuff started to go, well, I want to see more of this. And so now they've grown up, they start drawing. And that's how it goes, because every time something's published, people who grew up reading it want to push that boundary, right? So in the 1990s, you have things like Pieta. And what happens with tropes is almost always when a trope is developed, you get this weird expansion of it. Always. This happens over and over again in Yuri. So in Shiroi no Futari and earlier in Sakura Namiki, you have the one character who is emotionally volatile, right? And so then what happens is in all Yuri, one of the characters is emotionally volatile, and you get that all the way through the 2000s. And you get like Sachiko and Maria Samaga Mithuru. You have the Nadeshiko character is the emotionally volatile one, right? And what happens is you get that expanded out into sort of, the emotionally volatile one is abused or, hysterical or violent. And you get that in through Strawberry Panic, and you get that all the way up through Citrus.
Yeah.
It just keeps going on and on and on. When I saw it in Citrus, I was like, done. We're done. Last one ever. Never tolerating this again. But, and one of my favorite memories actually of being at the Yuri 10 was talking to the woman who was leading me around, Uchida-san, and we were standing in front of the pictures of them. And I said, but look at these faces. They're miserable. I said, I could totally see May needs therapy more than a girlfriend. And Yuzu, what you could totally see her like in college, like 4 years later, with her 17th girlfriend, and the girlfriend going, yes, I know about your sister. Shut up. I could totally see, like the two of them would just never get past this.
So
I'm standing in front of us doing this, and the two of us are hysterical, and like people are like, what? Anyway, so what happens is there's this assumption in this couple that one of them is emotionally volatile / mentally not okay, And so then Pietà is a story that I talk about, and it's actually in the exhibit as well, where that is flipped. And it turns out that when it appears originally that one of the girls is in fact suicidal and violent, it turns out she's actually okay, and it's her family that's been lying about it. And her family is abusive, and it's the love that she has for the other girl that saves her. And I think it's a fantastic story. It's the mid-90s, and of course, right around that same time, we have Sailor Moon. And so, really,
modern Yuri fandom begins with Haruka and Michiru.
It absolutely does.
Like you said before, they're the queens of Yuri.
They're the queens of Yuri.
Literally.
On 7 o'clock on Sunday nights, Shinjuku Ni-chome would come to a halt while people went and watched the show together at bars. Because they're just so gay, you know, and it's the first time that a lesbian couple have ever been seen ever on Japanese TV of any kind. And then, of course, with Ikuhara, they get gayer and gayer all the way through the first 10 episodes of Stars, where they get really gay.
So many incredible innuendos, too. Like, they really hint
Not
at
real golden innuendo-y. I mean, it's like, I don't want to hear
like
that outside
jokes.
bed. Like, I mean, seriously, it's not very...
Yeah, the great line in the Super S movie.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of, I actually did a poll on Twitter recently, like, which is the best line? Like, is it, you know, a world without Haruka is not a world worth saving? Or is it, you know, you're getting heavy, I don't want to hear that outside bed? Or... you know, I want you to treat me gently later when we're alone. which is the gayest line? I mean, these are not innuendo. Like, this is like, hi, they sleep together.
Yeah, it is explicit.
So that was really when it all really started. And then what happened was that late 1999, you had Utena right on top of that. Again, Ikuhara. And then on top of that, in 99 was also the Maria Samaga Miteru novels. So in 2000, in the year, I think it was believed 2000 was Ibara no Mori, which is the third novel where we have Sei's very, very tragic gay love affair, which was beautifully written, and I was blown away. I'm constantly blown away by Kono Oyuki's writing. She's really, really a very good writer. And I don't say that about light novels of anybody else. I've never read another person who can write a light novel that's worth reading, but hers are amazing. And Sei is an incredibly complex and interesting character, and she's as gay as the day is long. And then, of course, we have Shizuka as well. And so that series just kind of cemented it because, of course, Konoyuki was referring back to the S aesthetic. And she was using those couples and using those tropes and using the girls lit S aesthetic tropes very, very overtly, and then making them modern and funny and interesting and engaging and charming all at the same time, and then getting us all really into it for 15 years and almost, 40, I think it was 40 volumes of the books, plus 4 seasons of the anime, plus the multiple drama CDs. And
that's incredible.
It's on and on and on, and great stuff. So by that time, then you really had a Yuri fandom, and because Maria Samaga Miteru resurrected the aesthetic whole, all in and of itself, understanding all the tropes, she writes so intelligently, she completely understands every single reference she's putting in there. So if you're a Japanese fan, you know what she's doing with this. And so that was when I'm writing on my blogs, if I want you to understand this resurrected S, the whole S aesthetic. And then what happens immediately is that people who aren't as good immediately run with it. And so you get things like Kanazuki no Miko, which is 2 of the most talentless hacks in anime manga, making an amazingly bad, good, weird, popular series. And it's good. It's good stuff, but it's also really terrible at the same time. And then they get worse and worse and worse, and they just keep taking, and they're hacking it to death in their own aesthetic. And then you get parodies of that, and parodies of those, and parodies of those, and then flipping, and digressions, and it just goes crazy. So by 2003, which is now right before the Maria Samaga Miteru anime, you have a magazine called Yurishimai comes out. It's the first Yuri magazine ever. And it comes out quarterly. So there's a couple of issues before Maria Samaga Miteru anime hits and goes kaboom all around Japan and here in America too. And then you have Yurishimai is around for 2 years. It's doing well. It's totally successful, but the company decides they don't want to do it anymore, and they sell it whole to Ishichinsha, who changes the name to Yurihime. A couple of years later, they relaunched Yurihime and Yurihime S, and then they relaunched again in 2011 as Comic Yurihime, and now as of 2017, it's been monthly. It's been the only monthly manga magazine. And in between there, you had a bunch of other magazines come and go and things grow and change. And now we've got an industry in which more publishers than ever in Japan and America are pounding out as much Yuri as you can. It's a growth industry. It's still incremental growth. It's not going to be like BL because it appeals to a different set of niches, but it appeals to multiple sets of small niches. Yeah. So you've got this, we're just really in a boom year. And for this year, 2019, to be the 100th anniversary, in the middle of one of the most massive growth spurts Yuri has ever had, you have Kamakiri Hime as a monthly. You have Galette, which is a creator-owned, crowd-funded Yuri quarterly magazine, which is just fantastic in Japan. And then you have just all this manga being licensed in a way that I've just never seen. It's extraordinary.
It's incredible. It's like such a recent thing too. Like it was in 2010 really where there was like a first publishers were like really bringing over like Yuri, like after ALC, like one of the other publishers really were bringing over more Yuri titles.
It was about 2007 or 8, I think, when Seven Seas initially tried with their Strawberry line, and it wasn't their fault. It's a kind of a long story, but Japanese publishers have had a tendency, and some still have, some of the larger ones particularly, have a tendency to make you prove your loyalty by giving you a really shitty title, one that's not likely to sell really well. Publish this and show that you're that you'll do what we want you to do the way we want to do it. And then once you've done that, then we'll give you the titles you actually want. And it's a really self-destructive policy, because in America we don't have that kind of money. Because you have to understand, Japanese publishing companies, the manga publishing is one piece of a larger publishing company. In America we don't have that, right? In North America, the manga publishing companies, that's all they do. They're very small. Up till very recently, none of them had larger investors. I mean, that's not true anymore. The landscape has changed. So Viz has Japanese investors, and Hachette Group owns Yen, and Seven Seas is also has investors. So you have a much different landscape now where they have more money and more choices. But up to that point, it became very difficult because we give you something sort of okay. Here's this, like I constantly refer to Viz being given Fire Inspector Nanase as here, publish this, and then we'll give you the actual title you want. Why would I waste my time as an American publisher publishing something that's a loss? And it's not a loss leader. It's not going anywhere. It's just I'm gonna put out however many thousand copies, and they will just go straight to the pulp mill. Nobody's buying it. And do you all remember Fire Inspector Nanase? Everybody, hands up. Exactly. Nobody remembered that. So it was just something they had to do to show that they were loyal. That's not really true anymore. That's changed a lot. Things have changed a lot on both sides. But what happened was the Japanese publishers had to change the way they do things. The American publishers got bigger and got investment money, and then they could take bigger risks. So 2007, Seven Seas tried, and it kind of failed, but they came back again in about 2010 or 11. And as it picks up, they're doing better and better. And of course, they got My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness, which was a massive hit for them, as it was for East Press. What happened in Japan was East Press was so successful that Shogakukan licensed the sequel. Now, Shogakukan is the biggest publishing company in Japan. It's also the most monolithic.
Right.
So there's all sorts of stuff going on there, where the way they do things is completely different with East Press, which is a small publisher, and they were like, sure, whatever you want, we'll do whatever. Shogakukan is really, really monolithic. So the decisions that Seven Seas has to make are different, and not always what they want to do, too. So it's very interesting, because bigger publishers licensing your stuff sounds great. Sure, I'm making more money as an artist, but she probably has less control.
Yeah.
Than when she was with a small publisher.
Especially because Lesbian Experience, that was, she self-published that first before East Press picked it up. But now, like, working directly with a bigger publisher, there might be more restrictions or more.
Oh, well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, so there's a little less freedom there.
Oh, a lot
though
less freedom.
Still feel.
Particularly with Shogakukan.
Yeah. Though I still feel that Soul Exchange Diary, it still feels authentic. But I imagine the process of working with them is still a lot more complications than when she, self-published it originally.
Did you read the second volume yet?
I haven't read the second volume yet.
There is a wonderful moment at the end, a very moving, where she is talking to her editor. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to spoil it. I want you all to please read my Solo Exchange Diary, Volume 2. None of her work is easy reading. I mean, it's very, very painful and hard. Yeah. And I respect her deeply. It's just not light reading. But I want you to read all the way through. Make sure you read all the way through, because there's a moment where she talks to her Shogakukan editor who says something that changes her life. And it makes you understand the role a Japanese editor has. I'm trying to figure out what I want to say here. The role that Japanese editors have is much more foundational than American editors. American editors, they aren't part of the creative process. Initially, usually. And I'm not saying this 100% across the board, because that's not always true, but in a lot of ways. But in Japan, the editors are very much part of the creation process, and handhold and cajole and stroke authors all the way through the process. And the editor really steps up and says something really meaningful. And I want you all to read that. So go read my Solo Exchange Diary Volume 2, because it's, I think, really worth reading.
Yeah, I really love Lesbian Experience and the first book, so I drag my feet on the second book just because it is like...
It's hard. It's heavy. It's heavy stuff. And it doesn't get less heavy. This is a woman who's struggling with a lifetime. This is a disease that is not going away.
Yeah.
There's no cure for depression. There is treatments. She's clearly trying. There's probably no guarantee that she'll be functional. I mean, she knows it. We know it. It's hard stuff. We can't make it better. And if you've ever been depressed, or you know someone who is, you know that, our culture generally tends to think of things as being very temporary. Diseases are temporary spaces between health. But if you've never been healthy, we don't have a lot of places where people understand that. If you talk to someone who's been chronically ill their whole lives, they will explain to you that there is no space in which being chronically ill is acceptable. People get tired of hearing it, and people get tired of you carrying this weight with you, and they want you to just, feel better. And it's not like that. And so she does a really, really good job of kind of explaining what it's like living with that in a really, really, I mean, her depression is so overwhelming. It's so constant. So it's not like it's a simple thing where it's not periodic. It's not seasonal. It's not situational. It's constant.
It's a constant.
She's living with it, every day of every moment. So it's again, that's why I think the comic essays are so important, particularly in Japan, where that kind of illness, mental illness, is not spoken of. It's not dealt with. And you do all that stuff privately and quietly by yourself, and your family deals with it quietly by themselves. To have these comic artists talk about what it's like to be diagnosed and treated and not treatable, is just, it really is resonating with many, many, many millions of people in Japan who have these things and would understand what it feels like and thought they were alone, or just couldn't bring themselves to tell that story.
Yeah, it's so important for people to understand what it is actually like to live with mental illness, and to have that daily battle, with yourself, with these thoughts, and these thoughts that can push you over the edge.
There's also a whole genre here in America called graphic medicine. That's doing the same thing. We're talking about people dealing with life-altering illnesses and family members being exceedingly ill and dying. And I recommend you all go to graphicmedicine.com and take a look at some of the stuff that's out there, because seeing it visually represented is different. It puts it in a different space in your head if you've got a family member who's suffering from cancer, for instance, and you read a book about somebody who's dealing with their cancer, it changes the way you approach everything. How you think about it and how you think about them. And I think it's worth doing it. I think it's worth surfacing these messages. And that's true for everybody. And that's why I think comic essays is so important. particularly for marginalized communities, like people dealing with mental illness or chronic illness, people who are disabled, people who are ethnic minorities, people who are queer, any area that's in which you are marginalized, having somebody tell a story that is similar to yours lessens the burden.
Because you know you're not alone, that other people are dealing with this. And
yeah, exactly.
You can look to their stories for inspiration or at least just catharsis.
Exactly. I think that's really it. I mean, there's a certain amount of, there's a lot, I think a lot of people, I was totally wrong. I want to say when I first read Lesbian Experience in Japanese, somebody said, oh, I hope this gets licensed. And I thought, there's no way. I'm like, really? Are we going to license this story? It was licensed and it blew up. Yeah. Clearly, it was resonating with a lot of people, and I was 1,000% wrong, because I did not think it would do that here, and boy, was I wrong. So good for me, good for the world, and I'm happy for everybody that it did so well.
Both Lesbian Experience and My Brother's Husband by Gengoro Tagami, I think, were such huge successes that I think it'll pave the way for more LGBTQ-themed works to be brought over and be spread more widely.
Yes.
And Yuri, especially as a genre, I think has increasingly become more prominent, but now I think that it's kind of in a renaissance where we're getting so many more works and so many of them are incredibly popular and doing very well. And there's a lot of, and the community is very big and like vibrant now.
Yep.
So I think that this is like a really great time to be a Yuri fan because we're getting so much of it. And there's so many different types of stories to enjoy. And
yes.
Now we're at the stage where like some of the tropes that have, been common in your manga are being challenged. And also we're just at a stage where so many more stories are happy and really about these characters, like in a relationship and just the experiences of being in a relationship and like being happy together. Like the Kase-san series by Hiromi Takeshima.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Just a series just about them working through their relationship
and working through real things, right? It's not ridiculous stuff. It's like, yep, I remember that. And a lot of that story. The reason I named it number one so many years in a row was that it was just stuff that we all remember, and I thought, well, how authentic and how real. Again, at TCAF, I'm going to be interviewing Takashima Sensei as part of a creator spotlight. I cannot wait. I've sent them the questions. I'm hoping that she'll do an Okazu interview as well. She's just really hit a lot of notes, and I hope deeply from the bottom of my heart that Pony Canyon puts out an official U.S. release.
Yes.
The Japan release of Asagawa to Kase-san, the DVD and Blu-ray, do have English language subtitles. And it's not that expensive. So if you go onto Okazu, you go Asagawa to Kase-san, and you buy it from Japan. There was a period of time where the shipping was like $5. So it was like $60 for the Blu-ray. And including the shipping, it was not much. So it wasn't like it was a real hardship to buy. It's so worth it. It is so worth it. When I saw it at Anime NYC, I'd already seen it, but I got to see it at Anime NYC with the producer and the director right there. And they were delightful.
Yeah, I remember it was a great experience watching it.
Wasn't it? With all those people?
Yeah, and I love the Q&A. The questions that the audience had were very good too. But like I remember, like the last one was this queer woman who like was asking the director, I thank you so much for making this story. I don't see myself represented in anime media so often, and they were asking like, what was your idea behind like telling this story? Like, what were you trying to express? And the director was like, we wanted to show that love was universal.
Yeah.
And really capture those experiences. And also, the comment of why they took out some things in the manga.
That was my favorite moment. Mm-hmm. That was great.
To like concentrate on the unified theme of like these two central characters. It's a story not about jealousy, it's about just love between these two people and them like working through that relationship.
And the line that he said at that moment was, it's about a relationship developing and communication within that relationship. How people in a relationship learn to communicate with each other. I thought, wow, bam, excellent. Yeah, that was exactly it. What I liked about it was watching the audience, because I had already seen the movie like 3 times at the point, because I have the DVD, so I watched the Blu-ray and the DVD. And getting to see the audience reactions, I had somebody in front of me who was just absolutely adorable, who was like every emotion. He had all the feels. It was so cute. And the audience was it hit all the right notes. It laughed in the right places. Sometimes you go to a movie and like people are laughing at the wrong thing or whatever,
Right.
I'm that person. I laugh at the wrong thing all the time. I get caught in things that are ridiculous and can't let go. But everybody was so into this movie.
Yeah.
It was so delightful.
It was a good screening. Like,
it was a good
people
screening.
resonated with the moments they were supposed to in the right way.
And it was so nice to see that. I really hope they do just a full American release. But if they do not, you can get the Blu-ray and the DVD for relatively cheap and on Amazon Japan. It's on our Yuricon store under anime. Mm-hmm. It's on Okazu. I've reviewed it multiple times, and DVD and the Blu-ray and the screening and everything. So do consider. I know it's sort of a pain in the ass to ask you to go to Amazon Japan and buy something, but this one thing, if you buy the Blu-ray, it's like $60 with the booklet and shipping. It's really not expensive, considering
it's worth it.
It's worth every penny. It's an amazing 58 minutes, and you will find yourself not regretting a single moment.
Mm-hmm.
Kase-san is a great series. Yes, it is.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing what comes out of your interview with Hiromi Takashima at TCAP.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if the panel will go online or a transcript will go online, but I'm going to be very curious to see, like, how that interview goes and, like, what is talked about there.
Yeah, I really want to talk about her reactions to the reactions, I want to talk about her work process and stuff like that. One of the things that I feel very strongly about with creator interviews is finding out how they feel about the things that have been done with their work and then, and how they do it themselves, because so often I feel like creator interviews talk about some other thing, like, oh, tell us about your personal life. And while I understand people's desire to have that information, you're never going to get that out of a Japanese artist anyway.
Right.
So I'll really be focusing on her early work and then her experiences working in pure Yuri anthology Harari, which is where Kase-san was born. And then I call the series the little series that could, because it began in a magazine that lasted 3 years. It died. The series kept going. It went online, and it kept going on independently online. And then it went to the publisher. I want to say have been awesome. Shinjuku has been 100% supportive of Yuri. They couldn't make Harari work because paper prices went through the roof, and they just didn't have the sales to support what they were doing. And I totally supported that. But Shinjuku has been great. So they found space for it on their website, on Wings Web, and then they moved it back into, now it's in Wings Magazine. It's running back in the magazine, and it's their lead magazine. Shinjuku has been terrific. And then when Putty Canyon took it up and made the animation clip, they did an extraordinary job, and that's online on YouTube. And then they made the movie, and I think it's been the little series that could. This thing just kept chugging along. And when it came out in Japan, and I keep telling this story over and over, every time I've ever seen an anime movie come out in Japan, it's lasted 1 week in the theaters. It comes, it goes. It's 1 week, you watch it while it's there, and then it's gone. This series lasted 2.5 months.
That's awesome.
In the movie theaters. Now, it wasn't every theater. I think the longest it lasted in any one movie theater was like 7 weeks. But when you count the whole road show from beginning to end, it was in some theater somewhere in Japan for 2.5 months. And I've never seen that kind of longevity on any anime movie ever of any kind. So, and they paired it a lot with Liz and the Bluebird, which I also watched, and it was extraordinary as well.
That's a beautiful film, too.
It is. I was really surprised. I did not expect to like that as much as I did. So I'm hoping we'll get to see a U.S. release. Maybe 11 Arts will pick that one up, too. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see the film again on the big screen, so I hope it gets theatrical screenings over here. Or, at the very least, a domestic release. But, I'm glad the import is so cheap. I might have to bite on that. I
think you really should, because honestly, this way it's got the English subtitles, and I understand that doing a separate US release is sort of a pain in the ass. But when I talked to Pony Canyon at Anime NYC, they did not discount that idea, so perhaps they will consider it. So, well, fingers crossed on that. Yeah, so that one's definitely our poster child for 2019, isn't it? It's sort of all the things. It's all the things, because it is all the things. It's a high school. It starts in high school. It's a school love story, first love story, all the typical things. And now they've moved into college.
Yeah.
And they're still together, and they're still going strong, and they haven't changed as people, but they've matured, and we're still getting to enjoy them together, growing and maturing and living together, planning on living together later. So I feel like it's a series that's really been very much the poster child.
Yeah, it's great to have a series where the characters are kind of growing with the audience.
Yeah.
It's like coming up on 10 years.
Yeah, like she was saying, it's like they spent 8 years in high school.
But yeah, it'd be amazing to follow these characters through adulthood, like even beyond college. And I'm just glad that there is more stories like showing these couples grow up and still be couples past high school.
I mean, because I get why they didn't, and I remember when Morinaga Milk's Girlfriends ended, there's a scene at the very end where Mari at least thinks about, well, one day we'll have to deal with like coming out to family and, dealing with society, but we don't have to do that right now. But at least she at least mentions it. And it's not that common until, up till that point, because it's hard. I mean, especially if you're talking about when Girlfriends was being published, there's no laws that allow people to develop relationships. I mean, now we have a couple of towns, a couple of townships, a couple of areas in Japan that have some kind of partnership certificates, individual cities, but we don't have an overarching countrywide partnership. It's not legal. It's not a definitive thing. Locally it can be. It's considered a nod, and companies and departments are being asked to recognize it. So it's really hard when people act like you should get over oppression when you're still living under it.
Yeah, I don't.
You know what I'm saying? And I'm sure lots of people know what I'm saying with that. There's a lot of communities for which that becomes valid. It's like, don't look at me and say, get over it. I'm still under it. It's really, really impossible. So yeah, I mean, so I think them growing up and hopefully we get to see them navigating an adult world, not without problems, but succeeding together will be part of the story going forward. I hope we see that.
And also, there is now more Yuri stories about adults. Like, I think Yuri is My Job is a recent one.
Yuri is My Job is not actually about adults.
Oh.
It's a high school story that's hysterical. It's about a girl who is basically an asshole. She cares more about the image she presents than about her real self is really kind of selfish and not very bright. But she wants this image of being perfect. So her outside face is her outside image is what she cares about. And through reasons, she ends up working at a cafe that is a Yuri theme, and it's based on a novel, a series of novels about girls in a school in Germany, and it's called Der Liebe Gakuen. And she is a cafe / student at this school and all this stuff. And it's very goofy. So it's very tropey because they're actively playing out characters with tropes. So one of the characters is actually a gal in real life, but she's playing the bookish, very, very, cool kind of insinuating One-sama character. So she's that. And her Hime's One-sama is really a very angry person in real life. She's really, really angry. But in real life, she has to play this very, charming Nadeshiko beauty, graceful and lovely. So they're not playing out themselves at all. They're playing these stereotypes of Yuri tropes, which is really quite funny. Also really annoying, but also very funny. So I recommend that.
That sounds great. It's like kind of subverting these Yuri tropes in a bit, or at least playing with them, like in the same way that Whispering Words did, where they put all the tropes in one story and actually made a very good dramedy out of it. Because that's what we are. Because the tropes are part of our heritage at this point, so we better have some fun with them. But there are a lot of, just to your point, there are a lot of stories about Yuri adults. Yuri stories about adults coming out in Japan. There's one coming up in July called Yuri Life. It'll be coming out from Yen Press. The Japanese title is Yuri Gurashi, and it's literally a Pixiv comic about two women together. It's their life. It's just slice of life, and they're adorable. And nothing happens. There's no plot. It's little vignettes because it's like quick 4-pagers. It's all color.
And the palette is fantastic, by the way. So I recommend when you pick it up, notice the palette of colors because it's really interesting. It's just a very sweet story about two people who are adults who live together. And it's nothing happens. It's pure slice of life, but fun. And they're charming.
That's great.
You know, they're fun. You actually get to know them. One of them likes weird bugs, and another one likes strange slippers. You know, I mean, it's like stuff like you would have in real world stuff. You know, so that's a good thing to look out for.
Yeah, kind of like Rica and Kanji. It's two queer people just living their lives together and just, you know, their experiences.
Exactly.
But another one I think that is coming out that I just remembered is I Married My Best Friend to Shut My Parents Up.
What an interesting story that was. That's by the same person as by Kodama Naoko, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, who did NTR, which I did not like and never reviewed.
Yeah.
For a lot of reasons. Pretty much exactly the same reasons I didn't like Citrus. Both of those. The narrative only made sense if you talked about abuse, but neither of them talked about abuse.
Yeah. NTR is an interesting situation. It's like, I know that before in other places you've described it as not a Yuri series. Even though,
it's not. It's a fetish. Netsuzo is a fetish that is just skeevy. It's cuckolding. It's not, to me, it's not an interesting story. It's a skeevy fetish.
Yeah.
So basically the entire plot is two girls having sex in the other room while their boyfriends are in the other one. That's just gross. Like, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm never going to like that, so no.
Yeah, it's just like, what qualifies your manga is not simply the fact that it's like just two girls in the relationship. It's also matters, like what is the focus of the story is like in terms of like how the characters are explored, but also like the audience, like how it is directed to the audience, like how it is presented to the audience, like the framing of the relationship.
Yeah, exactly. And this was framed as a cuckold, and it was icky.
Yeah.
And it was very abused. There was a lot of abuse going on and remnants of abuse. And like Citrus, the story would have made a lot more sense had we just said X character has been abused. If we could have said this is the framework, but they just didn't. And it felt like such an obvious giant piece that was missing. That it really just bothered me. And it felt like very, very coy. And I'm like, without that obvious statement, it just all doesn't work. But that particular artist, Kodama Naoko sensei, has a tendency to draw and write things that make me deeply uncomfortable. Her work has always made me deeply uncomfortable. And even when I like it, they're not unproblematic. And I Married My Best Friend to Shut My Parents Off has some serious problematic stuff. And some of it's dealt with and some of it isn't. And the bits that are dealt with, and I will not spoil anything, I do have a review of the series in Japanese on Okazu if you want to be spoiled. The things that are dealt with, I think, are dealt with well, and that really made it a lot better. She still has some problematic issues, and in her new work right now, Umineko Besso Days is running in Kamakiri Hime. There's also some problematic things, and some of her problematic things are just weird fetishy things that appeal to people who are not me, you know, and there's nothing I can do about it. And some of them are just things that she herself does occasionally, just makes things really skeevy for me, even if it's a good story. So I Married My Best Friend to Shut My Parents Up has some problems, and I think they address some of them and don't others. And I'll be very, very interested to see what people think of it.
Yeah, I'm curious to read that one because NTR is like a trashy read for me. I read that and it's like it is so mean-spirited.
Yes,
you know?
yes.
It's so like unpleasant in terms of like the relationships are just not healthy and the characters are all incredibly manipulative.
Yeah.
But I do like stories about terrible people.
Okay, fair enough.
Messing with each other. So I could enjoy it on that level, but it's not
fun.
Yeah, it's not. When I want a romance, I want like a romance, a story about two people growing,
right?
Like being in a relationship with each other, and that's not. So it's not
that's
a romance.
Not an NTR. Well, you know, my favorite problematic series about people who are terrible for each other. That's my favorite thing ever is Gunjo, and I'm really hoping one day we'll see that in English. There's it's two people who are terrible people. One of them is actually a horrible person. And when you find out why they're a horrible person and you feel bad about hating them so much, it actually makes you feel guilty, but they're still a horrible person.
Right.
And that is really an extraordinary feeling where you're feeling guilty for hating them, but you really hate them anyway. And the characters are really, really bad for each other. And it's violent and it's horrible and it's lovely. It's one of the most sublime things I've ever read. And I described it years ago as eating the most delicious razor blades. And that's also, I understand problem reads. I just, as it happens, because I don't like exploitative stuff, I just couldn't deal with both Citrus and NTR on that same level, where we have a character who obviously has been sexually abused. They are evincing all the behaviors of a person who was sexually abused, but we won't say it just to frame it correctly. Neglected. No, that's not what you do when you're neglected. That's what you do when you've been actively sexually abused. So.
Yeah, exactly. And just like a real misunderstanding when depicting mental illness in manga, like the victims of abuse is like to excuse the abusive behavior of a person because they have a sympathetic reason or because they were abused in their past and saying, oh, no, they can't be blamed for their actions because of their history. And they can't, but like, you just have to forgive them and accept them and then that will be their change. And no, they don't have to work through their problems. Like, it's not... Like, it's a real misunderstanding of, like...
how it works, right.
And also it's very empathetic understanding of, like, how a person has actually suffered.
This is one of the reasons I like Gunjo, because it doesn't let you off the hook that way.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that happens is we learn some stuff, and we understand better why the person is the way they are, but we don't forgive them at all. Because you can understand doesn't mean that they're making the right choices. And some of the choices that are made are destructive. And it feeds into itself. And again, it becomes this recursive thing. But anyway, so yeah, I get it. I mean, I get that. But I'll be interested to see what people think, because I married my best friend to shut my parents up is good and also not good. And it'll be very, very just nothing really like NTR at all. And I don't think anybody who liked NTR for itself will be able to make a connection between one and the other. There's no style. It's that her style is in her art and the way she tells her stories, but it's the two are not connected in any way. So it's a completely different piece and kind of more grounded in reality, and a lot more grounded in reality than most pieces. So it'll be very, very interesting to see what the general reaction of that is.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see, like, her write something taking it a little more seriously and not in a trashy way. It's kind of like with Gengoro Tagami, like My Brother's Husband is so different than his bara.
Oh, I know.
And like the stories he wrote, the porn he wrote, like
the porn he wrote is gay. They call them in Japan gay comics. So like this is gay comics, right? There's no joking in here. It's not like this is anything else. It's like it's gay porn,
right? But there's some real fetish stuff in that, like he does some incest stuff. He does some really weird power stuff in his porn. So it's like My Brother's Husband's like such the antithesis of like that kind of the tone in porn. Yeah. It's just
because it was a different audience.
It's surprising.
My Brother's Husband was for mainstream male readership, straight male readership. When I was at Rainbow Pride in 2015, he was one of the speakers and I was one of the speakers. And I was listening to him talk, and one of the questions was, of course, what was the reaction? And he said, "Oh, people who liked it like it, and people who don't like it don't like it." Like, that's always. I mean, that was actually the same thing that Nakamura Sensei said about Gunjo. There's always going to be like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you wrote that." But he said mostly everybody was very sympathetic to it because he wrote it specifically for an audience that would never have ever considered this ever. That was what it was for. It was not for gay people. And I know a lot of gay people who didn't like it because they were like, oh, well, duh. And I'm like, but it was not, I mean, in this case, saying it's not for you, it seems gatekeepy, but the answer is, well, obviously you know this stuff. You know what it's like. And they're like, well, I didn't do this. And I'm like, but it was for a straight man who has never once thought of this ever. And the protagonist is Yaichi. It's for him. It's for all the men out there who are him. It's trying to tell those men like, oh, I know you've never thought about this before, but here. Someone in your family is gay right now and you don't know it. Mm-hmm. Or you know it and you're not dealing with it in here. And that's what that's about. And so, it's completely different. It's for a completely different audience than his, Minotaur porn. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's always very interesting to see how like creators' works evolve when they write for a different audience, or like as they continue to make new works, how their ideas change and kind of some stuff they're willing to do later on, or some ideas that they refine later on.
Well, and also things that they're allowed to do.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
realistically, that happens once you've proven the success. Then your editors go, well, okay, I'm going to trust you to be able to do this, and nobody's going to let a new artist be really risky. Oh, that's I shouldn't say nobody, but it's less common for somebody to let a new artist be really risky. You have to sort of prove your chops first.
Right, and especially when you're dealing with LGBTQ teens and like acceptance is such a recent thing, and
Yeah.
like having out characters is such a recent thing. Like you really need to like once you've proven success and once you just open the door just a tiny bit, and then the next time you come back and open it even a little bit further.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, like, it's been such a long road. It's amazing to think, like, in Western cartoons, we have Steven Universe, we have such amazing representation.
Can I say Steven Universe is just absolutely stunning? I mean, my wife and I watch that on a loop, like, every day we watch it. Like, we watch it all the way to the end, and we watch it back, and we start at the beginning. It's because it's the thing that's keeping us sane in this administration.
Yeah.
You know? And it hits so many buttons. I'm actually very seriously considering running an online course on Steven Universe. Like having people write papers and because there's so much.
It's dense.
You know? So I was thinking what I was going to do is develop a curriculum. I'm seriously thinking about doing this over the summer. Developing a curriculum, running like 2 1-hour classes a week, doing papers on like Google Docs. Everybody could comment. I'm not going to grade the papers, but this way people could talk about stuff and present their ideas. And each week we're going to talk about a different facet. We'll talk about the animation, and we'll talk about the history. We'll talk about location. We'll talk about the art styles. We'll talk about the references in animation, in both Japanese animation and Western animation, music. We could just talk about all the pieces of it. And then at the end, like maybe make it like a pay what you want kind of class.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'll put a suggested price on it, and then you can join for whatever you want. I think it would be really cool because I'm like there's so much.
Yes.
Every time you peel a layer off of it, there's just more and more and more and more and more. It just goes on and on and on. And I mean, you could do a whole freaking lecture. Speaking of abuse, so if we look at Citrus and NTR and how they don't talk about abuse, let's talk about Alone at Sea.
Yeah.
Which is about Lapis and the abuse that she's been through.
With Jasper, yeah.
With Jasper, and even before that.
Portrayal of an abusive relationship is just
right.
It's unlike anything else that I think I've ever seen in a cartoon ostensibly for children. And then it's later on, when we go to Homeworld and we see the dynamic between all the diamonds and see, this is an abusive family situation.
There was a moment at the very end when Yellow is finally admitting what she feels, and she sounds like a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
And I was like, holy crap. But watching Alone at Sea, I just literally sat there the whole time going, holy shit. Oh my God. I can't believe it. Are they really going there? Oh my God. I can't believe it. That was so extraordinary.
Yeah, it's bounty approaching. It's just amazing.
You could just talk about that one for hours. So I think that deserves all the wins ever.
Yeah, I took a television course, like a media analysis course, and like as part of that, we were given a choice of TV episodes to like do a paper on, to analyze and like dissect and do a paper on, and there was no animation on that list. Like it was all just live action series. So I pitched my teacher, here are some cartoons episodes that I think have a lot to say and would be valuable to add to this curriculum.
Cool.
And she picked a Steven Universe episode. She picked Stevani.
Oh, excellent.
And I was very happy about that because, there's just so much to, like, in any given episode. But that one...
Fantastic episode. I mean, really, there's so many fantastic episodes, and the only ones we don't like are basically Onion. Yeah. We're not big fans of Onion in this household.
Onion or...
Ronaldo gets a little tired.
Ronaldo, yes, no. Ronaldo.
He screams a lot.
Yeah.
Only though his line, not for a fourth time, makes us laugh every time.
Yeah.
Not for a fourth time. We're like, every time he says that. I feel like that one was ad-libbed. I don't know if it was, but it was brilliant. There's so much. I mean, Lapis alone could be a master's degree.
Mm-hmm.
When she's standing there and the blue diamond is hitting her and she goes, I felt worse. That's the most devastating and amazing line. It's so extraordinary. You could just go on really, I would like to go on for like 8 weeks about this course because it's such a great cartoon. But yeah, cartooning has changed. Adventure Time and Steven Universe and She-Ra And even like Star versus the Forces of Evil, which put a
Yeah.
gay kiss in a background scene that was really visible. I'm like, cartoonists, man.
Yeah, Kate's cartoons have truly pushed the boundaries. Like there are just openly queer characters in shows now. Like, and we don't have to hide. We had a wedding in Steven Universe.
Wasn't that great? I sing that song all the time.
Groundbreaking landmark event. It's like we come so far than just like a decade ago where we had, you know, characters who were coded queer in kids' cartoons, but they could never be out. Like we had the teacher in Hey Arnold. Like only at the end of Legend of Korra could we say that Korra and Asami were a couple.
Right.
You know, it's come so far. I mean,
yeah, it is.
Also, a thing to talk about in Steven Universe is you could look at the influence, like, your anime on Steven Universe. You could look
absolutely.
at Utena,
obviously, Utena all over the fucking place, you know? I'm like, that's so massively obvious, but there's a lot of other stuff in there, too.
Yeah.
You know, and just, I really feel like it just hits so many buttons on so many levels that it really deserves a class. You know, I'm like, somebody has to hire me to teach this class. I would totally do this. I have a friend who's a teacher at the high school and college level, and I want to sit down and create a real curriculum with her.
Excellent.
And definitely, I figure it'd be something to get us through those periods when we don't have Steven Universe to talk about it. So yeah, no, I agree. Steven Universe is amazing. And I'm going to go back after we're done here and watch some more She-Ra. So yeah, I think things have really changed.
Mm-hmm. And it's so, yeah, I'm so happy that we're in this place now where we can have such ready access in like mainstream culture to queer representation and queer media.
Yep.
And I think like Yuri, it's just amazing to like trace back to the roots of it all and like the tropes and like, you know, we could explore these subversive ideas, but we had to get it back to like this heteronormative ending where we kill off our gays or, you know, because the expectation is, you know, the girls have to grow up to get married and fit into this rigid patriarchy. And now like just over the decades, we've had more people say, no, let's subvert these ideas. Let's challenge these ideas of gender.
Yeah, challenge more than subvert. Let's just say the things we want to say.
Yeah.
You know, and let's actually just say them out loud. And I think that's really massively important is that, you know, we have a world where people are, I want to say this clearly for anybody who's listening. In every generation, people have wanted to tell these stories and done this. They've been doing this since day one. Now, space is being made for those stories to be shared in a more mainstream way. And that is a significantly different thing than people are finally telling their stories. Don't imagine, and I mean this so sincerely, don't imagine it's never been done before. It's always been done over and over and over. If you're a girl who, you know, feels like you want to cross-dress, don't think that your story's never been told. One of the earliest lesbian novels in the early 20th century was Well of Loneliness, about a woman who cross-dressed. So don't think that you're alone and that no one's done your story. No one's done your story. Tell your story, but don't imagine you're the first person to tell it. You're living in a world now where your story might be given room to be shared, and that is different. Embrace that and get your stuff out there, but don't imagine you're the one breaking those boundaries. You've had them broken for you by 100 years of women writing. In 1920 was Well of Loneliness. In 1920 was Yana Orino Shoujo. These women were doing this when there was no spaces for this. They broke that wall for you. And the women who were in the sexual revolution were talking about queer work and lesbian stories and gay stories. And these stories were done before you were born to make space for your stories. So don't look at me when you've handed me Another Girl Meets Girl, Girl Falls for Girl, Girl Likes Girl, the end, and say, well, nobody was doing the story I wanted to read. 1,000 of those, 1,000,000 of those have been done. Yay that you've done yours. I'm glad. But you're not the first. You're just the newest, and that's excellent and fabulous. But at this point, I don't ever want to hear someone say nobody's done this story before, because the answer is that's not true. You just didn't know about it. That's a different thing because there was no space for it. Now this stuff is out there and it's coming out faster than ever before. So it's on fans to make that available. So what I do now is I buy these books and sometimes I buy extra copies and give them to my library.
Awesome.
So my library gets them out to other people. When I bought Wandering Sun, I gave it to my library and I said, this gets to you on one condition. I bought a whole separate set for my library. I said, this must be front facing in the library. When people walk in, they must see it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the section of books that it's in, when you walk into the main reading room, the young adult comics are right there, and Wandering Sun is practically one of the first things you see. And I wanted that available to every single person who walked in to the library. And it's going to change, of course, one day it's going to get moved, that's fine, but for at least these years, it's been right there up front. I wanted people to see this trans narrative comic, you know, and right in the front, and where anybody could reach it in the YA section, you know, and not hidden or whatever. My library's been awesome. They've been really, really wonderful about that sort of thing. But it's very, very important to me to get to share, to get this stuff out there. And that's one of the reasons I keep writing Okazu, is to share what I know. I just posted this week's news report, which is about what's coming up and what you need to know and what you can read and where you can read it and what's coming out in English and what's coming out in Japan, so that you can see what's happening. Another publisher who's just joined in English, the Yuri landscape. So we have Viz, we have Kodansha Comics, we have Yen, Seven Seas, of course, is killing it. And Shimanami Tasagari is coming. Shimanami Tasagari, Our Dreams of Dusk. Oh my God, everybody listening to this, you must buy 5 copies, keep one, give one to your local library, and then give the other 3 away to people you love. Mm-hmm. Do that across the board. This is going to be the best comic of 2019.
I'm excited for it. I've been looking forward to it for a long time.
It's fantastic. I loved every volume, but the first one and the last one just blew me the hell away. I'm sorry it's only 4 volumes, but it's worth every single page.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right that, you know, these stories have always been around, and it's just our responsibility as fans to share them and make them visible for others, and also to look back at the history and like celebrate all the creators and all the people who were telling these stories in times where these spaces, you know, they weren't readily available, but they made those spaces, and then that's allowed more people to come in over the years, to come in and keep telling more stories and just continue to expand the kinds of stories that can be told.
Yes, exactly. That is exactly right. Mm-hmm. I think that's a good place to wrap up, don't you?
I do, though there as some follow-up questions. What are some stories in Yuri that you haven't seen yet, but you'd like to see?
Oh my God.
Before you mentioned
don't
MMA,
get me started.
Yes, but before you mentioned MMA, I just wanted to ask, have you ever read the manga Teppu?
No.
I would really recommend Teppu, like if you like MMA manga, because it is about like 2 women in this MMA, and like they are gay, very gay. At the climax of the manga, like it's like they're walking the ring to confront each other, and they're in like wedding dresses. You know, there's a visual where they're like in wedding dresses. It's like, it's really great. And it's just about like this very driven protagonist who is very motivated, very competitive, and kind of not a great person, but that's what makes her so compelling. Like just her drive to be the strongest, to be the best. It's like it's a very great read. I hope it gets licensed one of these days, because
cool. That's
like kind of the Yuri sports manga that you just don't see enough of.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. The thing I don't have is a Yuri sports manga. It's the thing that I'm missing in my life. Mm-hmm. That's the one thing that I want more than anything else, is a brilliant Yuri sports manga.
What are some sports you'd love to see, like this?
So I've done this one too. I've written out of the list of potential Yuri sports manga. So the ones I want, I think are probably going to end up being kind of obvious. So like rugby would be a good one, softball, golf, tennis. I think you could do a couple really good ones on. Well, you could have done ice skating, but fucking Yuri on Ice has ruined that permanently, hasn't it? So, I mean, I think there's a lot that can be done. I mean, there's a lot of sports that... Oh, swimming is another good one. Mm-hmm. Let's see, what else did I have on my list here? I think, you know, football, ping pong has some classic Yuri roots. So pretty much any of those would be good. Tennis, of course. So, you know, there's a couple of series that already exist that really sort of set the scene for some things. Mm-hmm. So Yuri sports, yeah, that's what I want. So what's it called? Keppu? K-E-P-P-U?
Teppu. T-E-P-P-U.
Okay. I'll take a look at it. Sounds great.
Oh, yeah. Highly recommended.
Okay.
And then also, what are some of your favorite Yuri manga and like some of your favorite scenes, moments in Yuri manga?
Oh God, that's really hard. I don't do that. Well, my favorite Yuri manga ever, my favorite manga ever is Gunjo. I think it's one of the finest things I've ever read. And I hope one day very soon we'll see that in English. So that would be really great. And I liked it because it's a very violent and very intense, emotionally intense manga, and the moments of quiet, the moments of tenderness between the violence and the activity are so extraordinary. Everything about it is an extraordinary experience. And like I said, I've described it as eating the most delicious razor blades. It's a very difficult manga, but really, really the best thing I've ever read, by far and away. Other things that I really like, gosh, I read so many. I like that there's a Yuri horror thing going on now, a little renaissance in Yuri horror and lesbian horror as well. As I mentioned, Emily Carroll's When I Arrived at the Castle is a new thing out. It's a horror book, and I feel like lesbian horror needs to arrive. That would be something. Carmilla is actually the oldest vampire novel. It's older than Dracula, and I think it's actually a pretty weird read. Sheridan Le Fanu is a really odd guy, but I think lesbian horror's time has come. So that's a thing that I'd like to see a lot of, and obviously some senior Yuri's I think we're missing, but things that I really like, it's so hard to even express because I just read so much. I really like stories that take a different approach to how people communicate. One of the things I'm reading right now is called Goodbye Dystopia. It's running in Comic Yurihime, and it's two women whose backstories we don't know, who are traveling together, not for any purpose. And we're getting dribbles here and there of the things they're trying to leave behind. But we don't know. That's not told. We have to extrapolate a lot and interpolate more. But we also just get these long lingering periods of nothing in this story where they're just wandering through what appears to be a post-apocalyptic landscape until they need a new shoe, so they go to the mall. It's amazing. It's an amazing series in which absolutely very little is happening, and it's just remarkable. And I love that series. I love that series for the moments where you get page after page of absolutely no conversation whatsoever. That kind of thing is really, really great. And I guess I really just like that sort of thing where it's evocative. So like Yokohama Shopping Log, which I can't imagine we don't have translated into English yet. It's a travesty that is not yet in English, and nothing happens. That is the biggest nothing ever happens. There's literally entire volumes in which not a single thing happens. Grass grows and is blown by the wind. And like that's all that happened, and that's a great series. So I really like series that rethink how communication happens and why communication happens, how time passes. I like things that are nonlinear. I like that Yuri science fiction is on the rise. I'm really glad that Science Fiction Magazine had a Yuri special issue last winter. So the Japanese science fiction magazine focused on Yuri, had nothing but Yuri stories, and they were all not what I thought. I had an expectation of them being horrible, and really none of them were horrible. And all of them were weird and interestingly thought-provoking. And so that was really good. And that's, I guess, what I really like most is when somebody does something that I didn't expect. Because when you've read thousands of Yuri manga, you do start to expect certain things. And of course, I've just read so many tens of thousands of books. After a while, you start going, okay, well, I kind of expected that. And so when you do things that are unexpected, I think like something like the end of the TV series, Madoka TV series, the Puella Magi Magica Madoka. The end of the TV series was unexpected to me. It was thoughtful. It was the right answer to the question that had been posed by the series. How do you work your way out of an illogical logic problem? And the answer is to be illogical in a different way. And that was so thoughtful and unique. And it ended a cycle. It ended the series. It didn't do the Kanazuki no Miko thing where it was like, oh, wait, whoops, we're going to do this all over again, you know? It ended it. And I just thought it was so incredibly thoughtful and interesting. And that, to me, every series presents a question or a problem. how do you find your way out of that? And how do you find your way through that? The stories that interest me the most are how do you get to that end and how do you make it work? And when they're really good, like Gunjo, the end of Gunjo was exactly perfect.
Man, that sounds awesome.
780 pages, and the ending was nailed. It was a 10 out of 10.
You really sold me on Gunjo in particular now.
I'm really hoping to be able one day soon tell you that it's coming out in English. That's all I'm going to say.
I hope so. Now that more publishers are like licensing more Yuri, hopefully they look back at some of the older stuff and bring it out here.
Yeah. So that's my thought on that.
Awesome. Those are great recs that I'm keen to check out. But for maybe some
Excellent.
Yuri newbies, and I think this will be our final question here before we wrap up,
Okay.
what manga would you recommend to new readers, and what are some resources you recommend to people interested in learning more about Yuri's history?
Okay. I'll do the second question first. On the Yuricon essays page, yuricon.com/essays, we have collected all the references in English that we have and that we've written on Yuri and related topics like the lesbian community in Japan and gay queer comics related to Japanese manga. All of that is in one place. So I recommend going there. Where it's available, I have links directly to the full text. Some cases you would have to purchase it. But everything that I've done, everything that's been done is there on yuricon.com essays page. That's where you would go for all the information. And we've done our very, very best to create a body of scholarship there so that people can use it for their own continuing scholarship. And I hope 2019 will see the end of what I'm jokingly referring to as the Big Book of Yuri. I am working on the definitive collection of essays on the history of Yuri. And I'm hoping to have that published next year. We'll see. Fingers crossed. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, so I'm very excited about that. And what I'm going to do is I've got a bunch of publishers that I'll pitch to if nobody wants it, and that could conceivably happen. Of course, I will just publish it myself, but we'll do a Kickstarter and all that other stuff. And I've already got a lot of stuff planned for that. So it's going to be a pretty chunky book full of a lot of the essays I've written over the years about various series, like when I've done like a 25-year retrospective of Utena will be in there, or the history of lesbianism and mental wellness in Yuri, like essays like that, and plus other things like the history of Yuri magazines in Japan and stuff, and how we got from lesbian newsletters to Yuri magazines. There's a whole continuum there. So that's the kind of thing that I'm hoping to do in the next couple of years, and you'll have that available to you. The other thing for beginners, now this is always hard because recommendations are very hard for me. I don't tend to recommend things because I don't like what most people like, and what most people like is not what I like. What I do every year at the end of the year is I have a category on Okazu. The categories is a drop-down menu on the right side. On Okazu is my top 10 lists. At the end of every year, I collect the top 10 anime, the top 10 manga, and then the top 10 of all Yuri things, which sometimes are people or publishers or magazines or other things, or events. And then I do that at the end of every year to cap off the year. That's the closest thing I have to recommendations because that kind of is like the best this year. But if I was going to say, if you want to understand sort of all the tropes, like all the old tropes, if you want to understand tropes of Yuri, for a modernized version of classical tropes of Yuri, I would recommend Sweet Blue Flowers by Shimura Takako. It's a 4-volume set out by Viz Manga. They've done the definitive version of it. And when you read that, what you're reading is a modern version of aesthetics. There are a lot of things about the book I like. There are a lot of things I don't like. It was a classic, but it was done in 2004. It only came out last year in English, but it was done in 2004. And we've set it aside. So it's a foundational piece. After that, I would go with Whispering Words from One Piece books, and that is a 3-volume series that is a dramedy. It is hilarious and devastating and has the best ending ever. It's really just, it's the most perfect ending. It really is. It's the kind of ending that you read and go, hurrah! Like, that was just great. And what it does is it's all the tropes. It is all the tropes, all of them, all at once. all happening at the same time.
That sounds
And
great.
it is both hilariously funny and very, very depressing and sad. And then it's fantastic.
Is there a knife fight?
No knife fights. Nobody dies. No knife
Ah,
fights. No,
so there's one missing.
no pulp tropes, but it is all the Yuri tropes, all of them. So I would say that once you've read Sweet Blue Flowers, go read Whispered Words from One Piece books, and that will give you all the tropes again, but as a dramedy, again another modern version, and I think that will kind of catch you up on all of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can go play with Yuri's My Job, which is excellent and also funny and weird novel. Again, taking the Yuri tropes and playing with them, parodying them as it's using them in a totally different way, and another original story. And then on top of that, when Yuri Life comes out from Yen Press, I would say add that. That would be a nice slice of life, adult. So you've kind of grown up. And then above all, Kase-san, Morning Glories, Kase-san and Morning Glories, and that series, the Kase-san series, is definitely excellent. And I recommend that highly, and that one is out from Seven Seas. And I think I've caught all the publishers. Is that one of everything? That's Viz, Bien, Kodansha, Seven Seas, and One Piece. And as of this week, DMP is going to be putting out some Yuri Dojinshi.
Yeah, though DMP, you know.
Yeah, I know, exactly. And I actually say that when I wrote the news. I have issues, and I'm going to be really honest. I think they're very sketchy.
Yeah.
So, but they're doing straight up doujinshi, so it's up to you if you want to read it, but at least it's out there. They're in the Yuri field. So I think that's everybody.
Yeah.
If I missed any of the publish out there, I apologize.
Except for Dark Horse. Yeah. Dark Horse needs to stack up their game.
Well, they do the Korra.
Oh. Yeah, I mean, that's true. I guess, yeah, you can count that as Yuri. It's not necessarily manga, but yeah, it's Yuri. It's
I totally include it in Yuri. We sell it on the shop. They actually are putting out what they call the library edition of the Turf Wars, which I recommend because it's a single volume. I'm not a big fan of pamphlet comics anymore, and 70 pages was just on the edge of my tolerance for squeezing too much into little space. So you could get the whole story as one library edition in a hardcover, about 220 pages. And that is, I think, not a bad deal from Dark Horse. So that's Dark Horse too. And also, let me also say that if you like Yuri, look at American comics too. For God's sakes, there are tons of lesbians writing comics. Jennifer Camper is a brilliant, brilliant artist. Emily Carroll just has her new book. There is so much out there. Don't just stick with manga. There's so much American and Canadian and European. Oh my God, the European gay community comics. Oh my God, there's a new book out recently that I'm dying to get my hands on. It's called Revolution Fighting Fascism, LGBTQ Fighting Fascism in World War II. Resistance. And it's about gay folks in World War II fighting against the Nazis.
Awesome.
And it's all real stories. Comics. Come on. How awesome is that? So do look at comics. And there's so much. Don't ignore what's out there because you think it doesn't exist. Just look. Go to Amazon, use the people who bought this, and just keep going. Go down that rabbit hole. Mm-hmm. You will find so much.
Oh, yeah. Most definitely. There are all sorts of stories out there in the world of comics, and yeah, don't just stick with the narrow spectrum of manga, because in Western comics there's been a huge history of LGBTQ works.
Absolutely.
That's just
absolutely amazing. Gay comics is the thing. And if you're interested in the history of queer comics in the world, and I mean in the world, come to Queers in Comics in New York City. It's at NYU. It's $20 for 2 days, which I think is ridiculously cheap considering what you're getting. It is 2 full days of queer artists writing, talking, creating these. It has amazing keynote speakers. Paige Braddock, who is an acquaintance of mine, is going to be there. Just some extraordinary lesbian comics coming. We've had in the past, we've had Alison Bechdel do keynotes there, and you have to understand we're at the point right now. This is it. This is the moment where we can still access the first generation of queer comic artists in America. Mm-hmm. We still have Howard Cruz. We still have folks who were there, Trina Robbins. We have these folks and Mary Wings and stuff, people like that. We have these folks here, and we can talk to them and talk about their initial experiences back in the 60s and 70s trying to create spaces for gay comics, because we haven't lost them yet. And Queers in Comics is about getting them to talk on record and recording that for posterity, so that we can have those stories and never lose them. And Queers in Comics is an extraordinary event. I highly, highly recommend it. It's a conference, not a con. We're all going to be talking about the creation, the history of queer comics all over the world. There will be a metric ton of queer comics there for sale, and it's going to be an amazing 2 days. It's Friday and Saturday, 17th. It's just absolutely extraordinary. I hope you will all be there, because it's historical.
That's excellent. I mean, that just sounds like a great space for fans of LGBTQ comics and just LGBTQ fans in general to just congregate and discuss these works. So
absolutely.
And also, it's just amazing to have people who have were there at the beginning, like you said, first generation people, talk about those stories too.
Yes. One of the best things I ever did was I got to sit in a panel watching 5 of the earliest lesbian comic artists in America talking, and they were hilarious because they all knew each other, of course, back in the day, and several of them didn't speak for years, so they would talk about the feuds they had. It was great. It was so magnificent, and I just walked up and I gave one of our old ALC books to each one of them. I said, I'm doing for Japanese comics what you did for American queer comics, and thank you so much. And I just got to meet them and talk to them and tell them how much I really, really admire them.
That's incredible.
And that meant a lot to me, because these are people who are, I honor as my ancestors as surely as my own family,
Mm-hmm.
They're the people who hoed that rocky ground, so that people who are drawing, lesbian comics today can have somewhere to plant the seeds,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I gotta head there myself one of these days. But I definitely encourage everyone to go there. It's at SVA? God damn.
Yeah.
I went to SVA. Yeah, I gotta... that's a good excuse as any.
SVA, I want to say, SVA has been, honestly, put out some of the best artists, queer artists that I know, and people I've known from the Yuri world and been in and out. And at least one of the old SVA folks is on the Steven Universe team.
I mean, Rebecca Sugar was from SVA.
Yes, exactly. And Hillary Florio.
Yeah.
So some of the best artists I know went to SVA, and I met a lot of them back in the day when they were young and still going to college, and now I'm watching them become these most amazing, consummate professionals and just being everywhere. I just love it so much.
Yeah, SVA was a great place.
Yeah.
For queer students, and they had so many great events to celebrate queer art and queer comics and queer animation. So that was a great space to be. So it's in New York, guys. Just head over there. That I can wholeheartedly recommend. That's a great community to be a part of. And then it
absolutely is.
Yeah,
I agree.
I want to attend this conference. Hopefully, I can make my way out there soon.
I hope you can. I hope you do. And I hope you'll come over and say hi. We're doing a history of queer manga panel Saturday evening.
Mm-hmm. That sounds great.
Yeah. So it'll have Rica Takashima is going to be there to talk about lived history, and then we have Yukari Fujimoto, who is a teacher at Waseda. We have James Welker, who's a very dear friend of mine, a professor at Kanagawa University, excuse me. And we have, I'm going to blank on her name, Nagaika-san, and I can't remember her first name, and I apologize. And she's also a professor in Japan, and the three of them are going to talk about it from an academic perspective, and Rica will talk about lived history, and I get to be the moderator, and how exciting is that?
That sounds incredibly exciting.
It is. I love moderating panels where people who are smarter than I am get to talk. I love that.
Well, you're incredibly witty and well-informed, and so I think
Thank you.
You're great. You'd make a great moderator. But yeah, you're doing so many amazing events just in May alone.
Oh, I know, too many. But honestly, this year, the whole year, this is what I'm doing this year. The rule is this year and next year I promote 100th anniversary and the book, and then I do nothing for the rest of my life. That's the goal. I go back to watching anime and writing reviews.
Do it big this year. I mean,
Yes.
you got it. It's the 100-year Yuri.
If I get the book out, if I can get the book out in 2020, that would be ideal because that would get the end of the 100th anniversary, and then that would be it. I'll eat on that for the rest of my life, you know.
Mm-hmm. But this is the year to do all the big stuff. So yeah,
exactly.
There's a lot to celebrate.
Oh, and Crunchyroll. I'm going to be at the Crunchyroll Expo for the first time, and that's going to be nuts because I'm squeezing that in right before the tour. So I'll be flying out to San Jose and then going down to LA and flying out from there to be on the Yuri tour. So it's going to be crazy balls, but it should be great. And I've never been out to the Crunchyroll Expo, so I'm really excited about being part of that too. And I'll be talking at the University of Michigan and Michigan State in October.
That's excellent. Yeah, so many opportunities for everyone out there to meet Erica, to learn more about the history of Yuri and LGBTQ manga and comics. And yeah, just keep an eye out for all these opportunities to, attend.
I will probably pop up at a con.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm trying to get to all of them, like, and be on podcasts. And I appreciate so very much that you let me join you here today.
Thank you for coming on.
Because I really, really wanted to, I want to get I want to be able to proselytize Yuri to everybody, because I'm the Yuri Bodhisattva, I'm the Yuri apostle.
Yeah, you want to be the go nagai of Yuri.
Yes, well, that's what I want to be. I want to be the lesbian go nagai when I grow up. That's absolutely what I want to set a legacy that's so crazy that people can't stop playing with it. That's what I want. I worship go nagai. That would be definitely one of my goals, is meeting him just to tell him how much he's inspired me.
Oh yeah, it was amazing. I attended the panel at Anime that he was at, Celebrate Cutie Honey. It was a really good time. But yeah, Erica, thank you so much for coming on and spreading the word about Yuri and going into so much history, especially the fandom. And it's just incredible conversation to have with you.
It was such a pleasure. And honestly, thank you both so much. I'm really, really very, very pleased to have had a chance to talk to you and all your listeners. And it was a lot of fun. And you're great, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Your comments are fantastic. I mean, I'm on a podcast. I don't always know what it's going to be like. I've had people go, so, okay, keep going. You're great. You're a really fantastic interviewer. I just want to let you know that.
Oh, thank you. It means a lot for you to say that. I try my best. Like, I try to do the research, and I try to ask interesting questions that guests haven't asked before.
And you do a great job.
So I'm glad you had a good time, too. But Erica, for people to keep up with what you're doing, to hear about all the new cons that you're going to, or even just reach out to you to talk about Yuri and just, engage with you in conversation, where can the good people find you?
You can always, always, always find me. You can look me up on okazu.yuricon.com, or if you go to yuricon.com, there's a contact button on the top bar. You can reach me there. If you want to email me, you can find me at Okazu Yuri on Twitter, where I appear to be living 24/7. We have a Yuricon group on Facebook. We have a Yuricon Discord, which is currently functioning well. So if you're an asshole, don't join, because we don't want that. But if you're a nice person, come on and stop by. And you can find all those links on the links page on yuricon.com. And basically, you can find me just about anywhere. I'm kind of omnipresent, I have to admit. I will honestly say that. And look me up, say hi. If I'm at an event where you're going to be, definitely come by and say hi. I absolutely love meeting the folks who've read our reviews and our research and listen to us on podcasts. All of the folks at Yuricon, we just are really, really happy to meet the fandom. So don't be intimidated. I know sometimes that come off as really sort of, intimidating. I'm not. I'm really a nice person. I almost never hit anyone. So.
Well, that's awesome. So yeah, definitely reach out to Erica, guys. But actually, we'll sign off here in a moment. But before we do that, we never actually explain what Okazu means. So Erica, would you like to go into the definition of Okazu?
Sure. Sorry, I keep coughing here. So Okazu is when you eat a Japanese bento, you have lots of little dishes, and those are called okazu. We think of them as appetizers, right? It's not one big main dish, right? There's lots of little nibbles, right? So there's that. Okazu is also slang for lesbian sex because it's not the main course. So when I started Okazu, I wanted a name, and Rica told me about that, and I thought, well, that's perfect because it's going to be little nibbles of information. And it's all about lesbian sex. So Okazu is the perfect name for my blog. So that's why I call it Okazu. It's lots of little tidbits of information about Yuri.
And that's awesome. And I hope this podcast is an appetizer for all you listeners out there to go out and explore and enjoy the full buffet of information and the works themselves that is in the Yuri genre.
Yeah, and we are this week going to hit our 4,000th post. We have a lot of content there. I know it's very intimidating, but there's categories that make it kind of make sense. And by all means, please, explore around Okazu. And if you have any questions, give me a buzz. We're always glad to take, questions from folks who can't find stuff. Because there's a lot, and I do have pretty good navigation, and there's search and everything, but I know how it gets. And thank you so much again. I really, really, really appreciate you having me on today.
Thank you. Thank you once again to Erica for coming on the show. That was an incredible conversation and super awesome to talk about where the fandom began and how it's evolved over the years and the state of Yuri as it is now. But I want to give some community shout-outs just to also spread the word of some great places and some great people you should follow if you want to learn more about Yuri. Erica, of course, being one of them. We mentioned before the Okazu blog and the Yuricon site, but I'll throw that out there once again that, when I was researching Yuri, trying to learn more about it, I was reading Erica's blog where she has extensive reviews of so many different Yuri titles, in addition to great pieces exploring different aspects of Yuri history, like why the Catholic school old girls' school is such a prominent setting, kind of the history of mental abuse or people with mental illness in Yuri manga, and some of the problematic evolution of that trope in the genre. She's got some great essays on Okazu and some great reviews, but also her Yuri essay section on Yuricon is a great, really organized way to kind of learn about Yuri step by step. You could really teach an entire course just going through that entire page and looking at all the articles linked on there just in order. It's like a real classroom syllabus. So if you really want to in-depth course walkthrough of Yuri, definitely head on over to that as well. But also, if you're in the mood to watch videos and kind of prefer interpreting and enjoying information that way, the YouTuber Zaria is pretty much the queen of Yuri on anime YouTube. And her essays and videos on Yuri, its history, and also select Yuri series and what makes them so good or bad in certain cases is really great. I really enjoy watching her videos. And right now she has started a new campaign to do this Yuri 101 project to celebrate the 100 years of Yuri and also really give a comprehensive breakdown of its history on YouTube. And she's asking for a little bit of financial support on her Patreon to kind of make that possible because it is an editing extensive thing. So definitely, if you want to see that project really be brought to life, I would highly encourage you to go watch Zaria's videos and support her Patreon because she makes some great work. She's pretty much the only one on anime YouTube who's really doing a great job spotlighting Yuri. So I definitely go check her out. And then finally, my last community shout out is not really Yuri related, but I think it fits in to some of the themes we were talking about. Recently, Blue Flag on Manga Plus finally had all of its backlog chapters filled in, and I saw so many people just rush to read it at the minute that happened, one of which was Lost Teeth over on Twitter, who writes for the ANN column This Week in Anime, and they did a great thread where they were going through the series and kind of reacting to things live. But one thing that they got to and that made me realize and made me decide, okay, now I have to read this today, I can't put off reading it until later, was when they were spotlighting the character of Mami Yakihara in the series and just showing these amazing panels from the manga where she was going on this incredible rant that was just breaking down all of this cultural sexism that informs stereotypes of characters like her. And that was just incredible. And the minute I read that, the minute I saw those screen caps that Lost Steve took, I knew that I had to read the series tonight, lest I get spoiled on all the other greatness that Blue Flag has to offer. And trust me, having read and caught up to it, Blue Flag is just an incredible ride. And then later, Lost Teeth made this thread that really broke down the presentation of Mami Yagihara and how Kaito really exploits your preconceptions, your assumptions of what a character like her is supposed to be like, and really makes you think about kind of the internalized sexism we have for characters like Mami, people like Mami in our daily lives, and how that's kind of messed up our ideas of relationships between people. And it's just so really satisfying because there isn't another character like Mommy. There's not another scene like that scene in Blue Flag where Mommy is just going on her incredible rant that really takes down cultural sexism in such a satisfying and on-point way. And Lost Teeth Tread does a really great job exploring how Kaito kind of uses her in such a refreshing way to kind of make you think about your assumptions about other people and how that's been informed by culture, by society, and like to challenge those ideas and making assumptions of other people. So that's a great thread. I recommend reading that, and I recommend reading Blue Flag because it is an incredible read in terms of representation, in terms of the presentation of its characters and playing with preconceptions, stereotypes, and what you expect a character to be. Like, Blue Flag is just a beautiful experience. So I'm really, really excited that the backlog's been filled and more people can like read it properly. And also I'm really looking forward to seeing what the ending of this series is like. And in general, I'm really would encourage you to follow Lost Teeth because they always do some good treads on the series on Manga Plus and Shonen Jump that are really fun to read. But yeah, Erica, Zaria, Lost Steve, definitely check all those guys out. They're doing really great work. They got really great perspectives, and I highly encourage you to follow and learn from them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those all definitely sound like really great picks, and we'll definitely leave links to everything that Lam has talked about in the show notes for this episode.
Most definitely. But that does it for this episode of Manga Mavericks, discussing the history of Yuri in honor of the centennial anniversary. And now let's just wrap up with where you can find us. But before we do that, we should mention once again that our Patreon is live, that you can get early access to podcasts like this on our Patreon a few days in advance if you pledge at an early tier. You can also get bonus podcasts if you pledge at the $5 level, and you'll get a new monthly podcast every month. For the month of April, we released the long-awaited Manga Fights Episode 6 on Monster Girls, where Wix and Ethan battled it out on Monster Girl manga. What were the best ones? What are the best moments? What are the worst ones? And in that case, it was unanimous, but I won't spoil which series they particularly load. Also, some very fun fights, including what would Velor look like as a monster girl. So definitely check that out. It's a fun time. I'm glad to finally share it with the world. But what is really exciting is that as a $5 patron, you can help us choose our monthly bonus pod, what the topic will be about, and what you'll want to listen to. So you can choose this month between 4 different topics. That time I got reincarnated as Yamcha, the comic, sexism in Weekly Shonen Jump, and the history of manga magazines. So, if you feel passionate about us doing a podcast in one of those podcasts, then pledge to the $5 tier, make your voices heard by voting in our patrons poll, and then by the end of the month, we will make a podcast on the winner. So definitely look forward to that.
So actually just a little more talk on the Patreon real quick. So correct me if I'm wrong, and if I'm wrong, I'll edit this out. So if you pledge $2, you'll get early access to podcasts.
You will indeed. You'll get early access to all podcasts that are completed early before their intended release date, whether that be a full few days in advance or even, in some cases, a full week in advance.
All right, good. Just wanted to be sure because, so after this episode, we have a really cool interview with Joey Weiser, creator of both Merman and the upcoming Ghost Hog comic series, or I should say, volume. But, yeah, so we have that recorded, and as far as our schedule goes, we have that episode coming up basically the week after we have put this episode out. But yeah, so if you're interested in becoming a patron, you definitely want to sign up for that $2 tier, because if you do, you might get that interview a little earlier, maybe a week earlier. I'm not sure. Maybe you'll definitely get that interview early if you become at least a $2 patron. So that's something to look forward to. Wink.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, really, really looking forward to seeing the Patreon grow. Hopefully, at the time of this recording, we're actually recording this like right on the day it's being posted and put up live, just to kind of put the cat out of the bag. But no, yeah, we will definitely be talking more about the Patreon in the coming weeks here as it continues to go live. But yeah, you have a lot of stuff to look forward to coming from that. I'm really excited about. I'm actually like really excited about the Patreon. So I can't wait to talk about that more in the future. But for now, yep, that's at patreon.com/manga mavericks. So go check that out. But yeah, now we'll just get into where you can find us, and we'll start with you, Lum. Where can the people find you?
You can find me at Lum Ramayasha on Twitter, and as Lum Ramayasha on a variety of places like AniList and Animation Relation. Wherever there's a Lum Ramayasha, that's where you can find me. You can also read my reviews and find my other podcasts, including hashtag Lum Squad, on all-comic.com. And if you want to support my art, my writing, just anything else I do outside the Manga Mavericks podcast, you can throw me a tip over at Ko-fi.com/Lum Ramayasha, or my personal Patreon, patreon.com/Lum Ramayasha. And any additional funds and tips would definitely be a real help. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely go follow Lum and check out all their other stuff. I personally have been really enjoying Lum Squad, or at least the episode that's out at the time of this recording. So I'll definitely keep listening to that. But as for me, you can find me on Twitter. I'm Colton, by the way. You can find me on Twitter at SniperKing323. I host a few other podcasts such as Life Lessons, the Gintama Manga Cast. Even though it's on a bit of a hiatus, we still have a huge backlog of episodes over at gintalifelessons.wordpress.com. So if you're a fan of Gintama, go check that out. But if you're a fan of Detective Conan or Case Closed, whatever it's called over here, I don't know sometimes. But if you're a fan of that series, go check out One Podcast Prevails over at onepodcastprevails.com. It's basically a show where I record with my friend Doctor from the Ass Backwards Anime podcast about Detective Conan, the manga, as it's released by Viz Media. I really enjoy recording that show in particular, so please go check that out again over at onepodcastprevails.com. But as for All Comic and the podcast specifically, you want to go to all-comic.com. That's where we post every episode of the podcast first. And you can also follow us on facebook.com/all.comic or on twitter.com/allcomic_. But if you want to follow Manga Mavericks in particular, you want to follow us on Twitter at manga_mavericks or on mangamavericks.tumblr.com for all the latest updates on the podcast. Or you should subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Manga Mavericks. It's where we post, different excerpts of the podcast, such as different news pieces we talk about, different, all of our retrospectives and interviews and whatnot, and even some exclusive content every once in a while. So again, that's at youtube.com/Manga Mavericks. Email us anything over at mangamavericks@gmail.com. What did you think about all the news we talked about this episode? Do you have anything you want to say to Erica about anything, her and Lum might have talked about on the show today? Do you have any Yuri manga that you think we should cover on the show? Any manga that you're reading that you want to tell us about? Basically, email us anything about manga or the podcast in general, again, at mangamavericks@gmail.com. But the most important thing, guys, is that you subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple Podcasts. That really helps the visibility of our show. It really helps our show grow in general. So if you have the time, maybe go do that for us. So leave us a rating. That's always nice to see. But that's going to be about it for the show. Kind of a long one, but, we can get away with that every once in a while. And so this has been episode 86 of the podcast, and we will see you guys next time for episode 87. Bye, guys.
Sayonara.